Welcome back to Eternal Perspectives, the podcast edition. My name's Leland. I'm your author, or the author and host here for you. This is episode 12.2 in our reading of this article titled The Scriptures and an Electric Universe Part 1, where we use our cosmic perspective, our Melchizedek syncretism, and we point it back at the Scriptures. And we're taking a look at how does our paradigm match up to what we know and what has been revealed, especially through the Restoration. So let's pick up where we left off, right at the Tower of Babel. So watch part 1 if you're confused, if you don't know what I'm talking about in this article, or go back to episode 1 of my entire Substack introduction and testimony, and start from there. Go through the episodes and build up. We'll explain the paradigm that we're using and exactly, a lot of the words that I'll be just throwing out there and assuming that you understand, we explain a lot in depth. All right, like this here, dissolution of the polar column. If you're like, what the heck is that? Go back. We'll teach you. So the Tower of Babel. The same period of natural catastrophe of the dissolution of the polar column is the period in which the dividing of the land and hemispheres happens in the days of Peleg. This is also the period and environment in which the convulsion of peoples and the confusion of languages occurs to scatter them at the Tower of Babel. So, what am I saying? Let's go back to my whiteboard here, where I have the second dispensation of patriarchs, the 10 from Noah to Abraham, where I was trying to just figure out if Nimrod could have built Babel as well as persecuted Abraham, and figured out they could. The dividing of the land in the days of Peleg, we went over this. But these 10 generations are what we would talk about mythologically as the Silver Age, right? This is the age of Jupiter. And so a lot of the catastrophes and things that are happening during this time involve the removal of Saturn and moving to its spot, and the overtaking of it all of Jupiter, and pushing kind of the planets into their respective inner and outer positions in the solar system. So this is where you have the warring of the gods in heaven, and Zeus or Jupiter is reigning supreme and laying down the smackdown with the thunderbolts and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the catastrophes and things that are described in ancient histories and mythologies, they're attributed to Jupiter or to Zedek, right? We went over that article a little bit, how Jupiter is synonymous with Zedek. So again, when you have people like Melchizedek and Abraham being said to be disciples or priests of Jupiter, it's interesting, again, overlap that this maps on really well and explains that. Okay, so the Tower of Babel is happening in the same period as all that first paragraph is kind of bringing up. Just to refresh your memory, going back into it, at first a note about Nimrod. He's the founder of Babel and Babylon. From the Old Testament Institute Manual, we'll read this. It says, what sort of man was the founder of Babylon? The Joseph Smith translation indicates that, or not that Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord, but that he was a mighty hunter in the land. One scholar said the following of Nimrod. Though the words are not definite, it is very likely that he was a very bad man. His name, Nimrod, comes from Marad. He rebelled. And the Targum, which is an ancient Jewish translation or paraphrases of the scriptures, the Targum on 1 Chronicles says that Nimrod began to be a mighty man in sin, a murderer of innocent men, and a rebel before the Lord. Sounds like secret combination satanic stuff again, right? Says the Jerusalem Targum says that he was a mighty in hunting or in prey and in sin before God, for he was a hunter of the children of men in their languages. And he said unto them, depart from the religion of Shem and cleave to the institutes of Nimrod. The Targum of Jonathan ben Uziel says, from the foundation of the world, none was ever found like Nimrod, powerful in hunting and in rebellions against the Lord. The Syriac calls him a warlike giant. The word Said, which we render hunter, signifies prey, and is applied in the scriptures to the hunting of men by persecution, oppression, and tyranny. Hence, it is likely that Nimrod, having acquired power, when I read that, I think of Doctrine and Covenants, and when the scripture on acquiring power and exercising unrighteous dominion, and here it is playing out again, just perfect to that. I think of that immediately when I hear acquiring power and that kind of stuff. But here it is. Hence, it is likely that Nimrod, having acquired power, used it in tyranny and oppression, and by rapine and violence, I don't say that word often, and violence founded the domination which was the first distinguished by the name of a kingdom on the face of the earth. So another way to express division, as we've been talking about with Peleg, is to describe it as polarization. This brings the electromagnetic backdrop more into focus again. And we see this polarization or division within the comparison of Nimrod's tyrannical and satanic methods at Babel versus Melchizedek's authorized priesthood administration at Salem. We are seeing the rise and unveiling of the same polarized dynamic today, a church of the Lamb versus a church of the devil, just as Nephi saw. So from Nibley here, it says, thus, in the same patriarchal age, Melchizedek established a Zion after the pattern of Enoch, the prototype of the true city of God, the freest of all societies. And Nimrod established a Babylon that gave its name to the prototype of the kingdom of Satan, the antithesis of Zion. So let's revisit a story, or the story in general, that the Tower of Babel was an imitation temple built by a wicked generation who would not heed God's word through the wickedness of the patriarchs or his messengers. And let's also add in a few anecdotal comments from a couple of Orsons of early church history, friends of the prophet Joseph Smith, to color the context of the situation. And again, these are from Anthony Larson's things. And this first one's from Orson F. Whitney. It says, the object of the people who built the Tower of Babel was to reach heaven, to attain one of the starry planets, one of the heavenly bodies. I cannot conceive how a race of people could cherish the idea that they could actually reach the sun, the moon, or one of the stars simply by piling brick upon brick and stone upon stone. But the prophet Joseph Smith, whose job it was to shed light upon the darkness of this generation, is said to have declared that it was not their intention to reach heaven, but to reach Zion, which was then suspended in mid-air between heaven and earth, or at such a height as to render the project feasible. This certainly is more reasonable. Orson F. Whitney was an early apostle of the church. He was also the son of Helen Mar Kimball, who was the daughter of first apostle of the church, Heber C. Kimball. And she was also a wife of Joseph Smith before she was married to, I think it was like Newell K. Whitney's son. That's where he gets the Whitney name from. So again, people, early church history tied to him, close to him, would have known things. He was also an academic. He was also, who was the assistant church historian before being called as an apostle in 1906. So just throwing that in there in terms of who this was and what he's saying here. Now, in our paradigm, this doesn't sound preposterous. It fits the framework where there's room to embrace this type of physics that releases the shackles of gravitational limits once perceived. The polar configuration gradually fell away over many generations following the flood. So this all checks out as a possibility. It wasn't a snap of the fingers after the flood of Noah, and when the land starts to appear again, that all of a sudden the planets have miraculously moved into their current orbits. No, but that it was a process in time that was witnessed, and this was the myth-making epoch, especially when all these once unified body of planets moving together, what it seemed like from our perspective, right, began to be scattered or fight and shoot lightning bolts or interact electromagnetically with plasma and that kind of stuff from our perspective in the sky. And it would result in not just catastrophe in heaven and the removal of some of these gods or planets, right, to these outer limits, but also there would be a corresponding catastrophe and upheaval that would be released upon the earth as well, kind of taking the brunt of it. So that's why these things were watched with such careful eye. They were worried about another catastrophe like the flood, which would totally throw the kingdoms or the positions of hierarchy in the world like totally on their head. So this fits our paradigm. This is right, exactly this quote, and the idea of the Tower of Babel not just being they're building a temple and wanting to imitate priesthood rites and things, but that they were of the same mind of everybody else, Melchizedek and Shem and them going down, that they were trying to attain unto a Zion, a name and a city, a temple ritual that would allow them a translation, a resurrection, or a redeeming, a return to an immortal state. So whatever orb the city of Enoch and those who were translated were on, or those who ascended into heaven were on, it could have very well been looming in close static orbit before leaving with the rest of the dissolving polar Saturnian column. Keep in mind, too, that we don't know exactly how many bodies were up there above it. We talk mainly, like Thunderbolts guys only talk about Mars, Venus, and Saturn, like primarily. But Saturn again has a bunch of moons. Jupiter had a ton of moons. Mars has 2 moons. That they're all mentioned as well in mythology, and you've got to be aware of that to put 2 and 2 together, that kind of stuff. So there were lots of heavenly bodies up there, essentially, that had names and did things and maybe caused issues or acted like comets and caused storms or catastrophes or whatever from time to time. So we don't have enough information to paint it with authority, but I'm saying with our perspective and paradigm, there's room for all of this to fit, like a lot. It's great. There's so much room. Oh my gosh, so much room. There's never been so much room. It could have been very well been looming in close static orbit before leaving with the rest of the dissolving polar Saturnian column. So to be stretched out into the empty place, perhaps to be planted in another part of the new solar vineyard in order to be stored up against the season. And there's a little rabbit hole into Jacob 5, that footnote there, just to, if we're talking about scattering, gathering as an archetype and a parable of the children of Israel, as well as the story of Adam and Eve and leaving a paradise lost and needing redemption through Jesus Christ, right? This whole story, macro to micro to national to regional to familial, like this pattern maps out. Well, I'm applying it as well to the family of planets, which some were taken to be cast out or moved to different places and hopefully to be gathered and returned again, just as the promise of the gathering of Israel and of the lands. We celebrate that, right? Well, why not the lands and the planets together? That's the whole idea behind that. Another Orson had something similar to say. And this is Orson Pratt. He's the son, or not the son, the younger brother of Partly P. Pratt. But the word planet in here as well, it's added by Anthony Larson, I believe. I'm not 100% on that. That's my assumption when I yoinked these slides from him. But this is what Orson Pratt said. He said, about the time of Abraham, the Tower of Babel was built. And they thought that the city of Enoch was caught up a little ways from the earth, and that the city, or planet, was within the first sphere above the earth. And that if they could get a tower high enough, they might get to heaven where the city of Enoch and the inhabitants thereof were located. So now let's read the account in Genesis 11, 1 through 9 of the Tower of Babel. It says in chapter 11, the chapter heading says, all men speak the same language. They build the Tower of Babel. The Lord confounds their language and scatters them over all the earth. The generations of Shem include Abram, whose wife is Sarai, and Abraham leaves Ur and settles in Haran. So in verse 1, I'll read. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and there they dwelt. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. Just as a side note, I don't have enough information on this, but I always think of this as like, there's got to be some other electromagnetic connection in terms of building construction and stuff that perhaps contributed to this parallel that we're seeing, and why it would be mentioned explicitly. Maybe there are other reasons, but that thought comes to mind. That's why I'm saying it's a partial thought. I'm just mentioning it now because it popped in my head again as I'm reading it. So verse 4, continuing in chapter 11 of Genesis. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name. Let us make us a name. Does this sound familiar, guys? Lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men had builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound their language, or confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So let's jump. Here's a few takeaways given our context, okay? This is an imitation priesthood that was going on. That's what Babel was. That's what Nimrod was trying. They wanted to make a name. We talked about that and what it infers a little bit in our last essay on King and Kingdoms. They wanted to build city temple to reach Zion, to be translated or become immortal kings unto themselves, to take upon themselves the likeness and glory of God. They also wanted to escape any incoming potential catastrophe, as it says, right? Lest we be scattered. All that, like Zion, Zion had escaped the flood. And if Zion's up there chilling, and they knew that, right? And there was word of that, well, makes it all the more colorful in painting the picture of it wasn't so crazy for them to be building a tower like that. I want to read this from Velikovsky. These are his insights on this episode of The Confusion of Languages, because it brings in an important part of our catastrophe cycle and what we're seeing in this silver age from Noah to Abraham, the reign of Jupiter, right? There's a different type of element bombarding the earth, whereas with the flood and Saturn, it was water, right? It was the deluge. we're going to see that during this epic of the Silver Age and the catastrophes herein, a lot of it is like sonic wind. It's like electric wind, plasma wind, that's going to cause major issues, as well as we'll just see it all over the place mentioned, as Velikovsky points out. So this is from Velikovsky's Stelas on In the Beginning. You can buy it as a book now, but these were just things that he had written about earlier catastrophes and episodes that precede his book Worlds in Collision, which focuses on the time of Moses and the Exodus kind of moving forward. And so this book goes into the previous catastrophes that we're talking about now. He says, the sequence of events as presented in the book of Genesis places the catastrophe of Babel next to the deluge. And then they read the scriptures we just read, or he quotes them, some of them. And then he says, the rabbinical sources explain that the purpose of the tower was to secure a shelter for the city of Babel in case the deluge should occur another time. The men, and here they're quoting now from rabbinical sources, the men who were before us, God has destroyed with a deluge. If he shall think again fit to be wroth with us, and seek to destroy us even with a deluge, we shall all perish to a man. But come, let us prepare bricks and burn them with fire that they may withstand the waters, and building them together with the asphalt, let us make a high tower, the top of which shall reach into heaven, in order that being delivered from the deluge, we may find safety in the tower. Okay, so you've got a lot of overlap here. Safety in the tower can be they're imitating the covenants again, that we know that in stand in holy places, and they're seeking that covenantal protection from God or from a God, whatever. Obviously, this is the Antichrist scenario, so you're going to have that horseshoe where everything's pretty parallel to what we expect in temple language. This is the same type of idea being expressed, but in the opposite extreme, the opposite polarity. This purpose of the builders is found, and this is Velikovsky now, this purpose of the builders is found also in an account of catastrophe which the Aborigines of Central America transmitted from generation to generation. Ixtlilxochitl, after narrating the story of the deluge, which brought to a close the first world age, or Atonatiuha, right? So think of it, the golden age. So a deluge brings to end the golden age, and destroyed most of mankind. Described this Ixtlilxochitl described the catastrophe which ended the second age. We're talking about the Silver Age, right? Or Ehekatonatiuha. I can't. I'd have to practice that, guys. Sorry, didn't do that. But which is called the Son of Wind. So again, kind of going back to what I was saying. This first golden age is destroyed by a deluge. The second catastrophe, the second world, is destroyed by the Son of Wind, which would be Jupiter. But I jump out of context here. So he quotes more from these sources here. He says, and as men were thereafter multiplying, they constructed a very high and strong zakwai, which means a very high tower, in order to protect themselves when again the second world should be destroyed. At the crucial moment, their languages were changed, and they did not understand one another, and they went into different parts of the world. The same author also gives another version of the same catastrophe. He says, when 1,715 years had passed since the deluge, men were destroyed by a violent hurricane, huracan, which carried off trees, mountains, houses, and people, and great buildings, although many men and women escaped, especially those that were able to take refuge in caves and places where this great hurricane could not reach. Similarly, Gomara, I think he was a Spanish, who was Gomara? Now I'm curious. Spanish conquistador, Lopez Gomara, historian, went with Cortez on his conquest of Mexico. That's what it was. So Gomara, circa 1510 AD, between that period, but next 50 years from there, he writes this: the wind which occurred at that time was so great and of such a force that it overthrew all buildings and trees, and even broke mountains apart. Many of the sources which recount the destruction of the Tower of Babel maintain, in close accord with the Mexican account, that the catastrophe was caused by a violent wind. Thus, the Sibyl is said to have prophesied, and here's the prophecy, Sibyllian? I just forgot how to say that word, but prophecy from the Sibyl. When are fulfilled the threats of the great God with which he threatened men, when formerly in the Assyrian land they built a tower, and all were of one speech, and wished to rise even till they climbed into the starry heaven, then the immortal raised a mighty wind, and laid upon them strong necessity. For when the wind threw down the mighty tower, then rose among mankind fierce strife and hate. One speech was changed into many dialects, and earth was filled with diverse tribes and kings. In the book of the Jubilees, it is said that, and this is Velikovsky again, quoting the book of Jubilees, the Lord sent a mighty wind against the tower and overthrew it upon the earth. He says the Babylonian account, as transmitted by Abedinus, tells that once, let's see who he is. I think he's probably a Greek historian doing Babylonian history. Yeah, okay. Greek historian doing Babylonian history. Tells that once men built a high tower where now is Babylon, and when it is already close to heaven, the gods sent winds and ruined the entire scheme. And men, having till then been all the same speech, received now from the gods many languages. Other accounts give the impression that a strong electrical discharge, possibly from an overcharged ionosphere, found a contact body in the high structure. According to a tradition known to the 12th century traveler Benjamin of Tudela, fire from heaven fell in the midst of the tower and broke it asunder. In the tractate Sanhedrin of the Babylonian Talmud, it is said, a third of the tower was burnt, a third sank into the earth, and a third is still standing. Think of the third parallel. Interesting there, huh? The Tower of Babel story was found in the most remote parts of the world prior to the arrival of missionaries in those places, thus before the biblical account became known to the Aborigines. For instance, what is that saying? That's implying that they knew this isn't a story that the Bible put into their heads, but that they had traditions that witnessed of the same thing that the Bible's talking about. This happens over and over again when you actually look at the mythologies and traditions of the world. For instance, on the island of Hao, part of the Paumotu, or the Taumotu Islands of Polynesia, the people used to tell that after a great flood, the sons of Rata, who survived, made an attempt to erect a building by which they would reach the sky and see the creator god Betea, or Atea. But the god, in anger, chased the builders away, broke down the building, and changed the language, so they spoke diverse tongues. The question of biblical influence was discussed by the folklorist. They, the natives of Hao, declared that this tradition existed already within their ancestors before the arrival of the Europeans. I leave to them the responsibility for this declaration. All I can certify is that this tradition contains many ancient words which today are no longer understood by the natives. The Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Mayans, narrates that the language of all the families that were gathered at Tulan was confused, and none could understand the speech of the others. The Casca Indian story makes the result into the cause. The Indians narrate that a great darkness came on, and high winds which drove the vessels hither and thither. Think of this great darkness. When we see catastrophe, and cosmic catastrophe especially, when you have gases and things coming down, great darkness is expected in certain situations. We have it in the Book of Mormon popping up again very prominently, where you can't even light a match in it because there's something weird going on in the atmosphere. Right? This is exactly the kind of cosmic witness that we find in these catastrophe cycles that mirror the pride cycle and the advent of Christ or his angels or his ministers or his deliverance, his power. And high winds which drove the vessels hither and thither. Okay, it says, the people became separated. Still speaking of the Indian story here, the Casca. Some were driven away. Long afterwards, when in their wanderings they met people from another place, they spoke different languages and could not understand one another. With this exception, the Casca story may refer to any great upheaval and is actually an effect of large-scale migrations. The traditions of the peoples make the catastrophe the immediate cause of the confusion of languages and the dispersion as well. So while the account in Genesis and that given by Abedinos and various other sources connect the story with a certain place in Mesopotamia, other traditions localize it in many different countries. In each case, the entire population of the world is said to have been affected. If the nature of the catastrophe was cosmic, the same occurrence should have taken place in different countries. In this case, the existence of similar traditions in many corners of the globe is of no avail for tracing the migration of ancient tribes. The Arabic tradition makes South Arabia the scene of the upheaval, followed by confusion of languages and migrations. Similar experiences could have been brought about by one and the same cause in many places. Right? If there's this electrical discharge that hits Earth, all the high points of contact are going to get zapped, and you could have all the imitation temples that might have been being built up in other spots as well, kind of what he's suggesting, being hit with the same thing, so you have the same general thing happening. Okay. It appears that after the flood, the plains of Mesopotamia became one of the few cultural centers of the world. Now, in our perspective, I will say, I think they're all just echoes of the same event, and that it gets confused in which land it happened in, because you have people living in lands for so long, like let's say here in Central America, that they would deny or even believe that there's another land on the other side of the world, or Or they would call it. It could be. I'll say it could be blurred and confused in that respect. So just kind of the diffusion, the game of telephone through history could account for that as well, just kind of as a generic historical or historian answer kind of thing. Now, another flood could have caused the utter destruction of the human race, and this was feared because of the memory of the flood. A few centuries earlier, it was very vivid. Observations of the movements of the heavenly bodies may have provided a warning of the new catastrophe, and large structures were built for refuge. But when the event came, the structures were overwhelmed and destroyed by hurricanes and powerful electrical discharges. I like that. If the rabbinical concept of the 7 earths molded out of one another in successive catastrophes, like we talked about, we called it the Hebrew cosmogony in previous episodes. I think it was my episode in New Neil Catastrophism, or one of them. The generation which built the Tower of Babel inhabited the 4th earth, but it goes on to the 5th, where the men become oblivious of their origin and home. Those who built the Tower of Babel are told to forget their language. This generation is called the people who lost their memory. The earth which they inhabited was the 5th earth, that of oblivion. In the ancient Mexican traditions, it is told that those who survived the catastrophe of the Son of Wind lost their reason and speech. The characteristic of this catastrophe was its influence upon the mental or mnemonic capacity of the peoples. The description of it, as told by many tribes and peoples, if it contains authentic features, arouses the surmise that the earth underwent an electromagnetic disturbance, and that the human race experienced something that in modern terms seems like a consequence of a deep electrical shock. The application of electrical current to the head of a human being often results in partial memory or loss of memory. Also, a loss of speech may be induced by the application of electrodes to specific areas of the brain. So just keep that in mind. This ties in, I know that was kind of a read, but this ties in our body electric concept that we're talking about as well into all of these episodes to make them more vivid, more real. So here are my notes on this. The son of wind, or the sun and wind. Keep in mind this idea of strong wind associated with this catastrophe when we explore the experience of the brother of Jared as well. Now in the book of Jubilees, it is said that the Lord sent a mighty wind against the tower and overthrew it upon the earth. I think I'm just copying. I should have just read these. These are like the highlights of the article. We'll read the whole one. Let's see if there's any other good nuggets I can read here. Maybe we can skip ahead. Okay, so we have more witnesses from around the globe. In each case, the entire population of the world is said to have been affected. We have observations in the movements of heavenly bodies. Okay, yeah, so these are all just pulled out of there. Okay, now here's another article where he details Mercury as the cause of this electrical disturbance. I'm not going to read that whole article, especially if I just summarized them there for us. But here's the general idea. You can read it if you'd like. Mercury, once a satellite of Jupiter or Saturn, was pushed from its orbit and directed to the sun. It may have been seen as a comet, which is memorialized by the entwined snakes of the caduceus. Contact between the magnetospheres of Mercury and Earth may have overcharged the Earth's ionosphere and caused the fire, lightning, wind, and confusion of languages and dispersal of peoples. So this is where he goes with it, that Mercury acting as a cometary planet, moving in position rapidly and like shooting out at the Earth, right? This is the prototypical comet that Venus takes the aspect of later as it moves around. These different planets, they like take the same shape and shift, and this is why it can be so confusing to track who's who and what's what. You've got to place them in their correct age, their epoch, and also have kind of the right history of how the planetary evolution happened, or how this idea of this mythological idea happened. I was getting a little too convoluted there. Sorry, guys. Okay, here we go. So Mercury may have been seen as a comet, which is memorialized. Oh, I just read that. Mercury as Nebo. And this is another cool thing in there that, and it just ties in the mythological part of Mercury as the acting agent for this event, as well as the tying it back to Joseph Smith's language, that it perhaps was the city of Enoch that this tower and Nimrod and these other people were attempting to get up to, as perhaps Mercury might be a symbol of that, as Nebo, Enoch, Hermes, these types of names are associated with the planet Mercury all throughout occult history, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, ancient Egyptian magic, that kind of stuff. Like the association with these translated beings and Mercury, especially as the planet and messenger, are uncanny. Okay, so what did I say here? I said Babylonian son of Marduk, Nebo. Nebo's the Babylonian son of Marduk, or Jupiter. He's Thoth. He's Odin, Hermes, Enoch. These characters were associated with planets and had command over speech and memory and knowledge, like when you look into this kind of stuff. So to me, again, just supports this idea. And we can look at these mythologies and not just see them as fanciful things or whatever, but as evidence and proof that Joseph Smith was right, that these things are real, that the scriptures are true, that Jesus is king. Like, this is amazing. Like, there's no wasted literature when you're looking at stuff this way, especially the good stuff. All right, I'm going to pause and get a drink myself, and I'll be right back. We start with the Brother of Jared and 16 Stones. All right, moving forward. We have the account in the Book of Ether of the Brother of Jared and his interface with the Lord during the same cosmic catastrophe that we've been describing above. The Book of Mormon is an additional corroborating witness of the Lord's dealings with his children at the time of the tower. In Ether, chapter 1, verses 33 through 35, we read, "Which Jared came forth with his brother and their families, with some other of their families, from the great tower, at the time of the Lord confounded the languages of the people, and swore in his wrath that they should be scattered upon the face of the earth. And according to the word of the Lord, the people were scattered. And the brother of Jared, being a large and mighty man, and a man highly favored of the Lord, Jared his brother said unto him, Cry unto the Lord, that he will not confound us, that we may not understand our words. And it came to pass that the brother of Jared did cry unto the Lord, and the Lord had compassion upon Jared. Therefore he did not confound the language of Jared and his brother were not confounded." The story goes on, but a few points here. This whole scenario fits the recurring theme of Exodus is apocalypse. If there's one thing like you remember over and over again, think of that. Think of Exodus as apocalypse. You want to understand John's revelation, you need to understand the Exodus of Moses and all the plagues and the things, because they reoccur in what's going to happen at the second coming and at all these planetary encounters, at all these critical cycles of catastrophe that meet the pride cycle, where you have an event, right? Third Nephi is one of these events. You have Isaiah's day, you have one of these events, the scattering of Israel, right? You have this here at the Tower of Babel. You have something happening at the dividing of the days of Peleg and the entire earth, something similar, right? You have the flood. You have all these major cosmic events that do happen and will happen and are prophesied to happen over and over again. And this is what we're looking forward to at the second coming, okay? This is another one of these apocalypse, obviously, is what we call it. But it's the same pattern. So this whole scenario of Jared and his family are like Moses, are like Abraham, are like Lehi, are like the Gentiles. Like it's repeating. And that's why I believe it's included so plainly to see it that way, as fitting this pattern. It's the pride cycle overlapped with the catastrophe cycle, and how the Lord leads his faithful children into a promised land because of his covenants with them. So read Ether 4, the whole chapter, and look for this pattern in Moroni's summary and prophecy. I discern a topical chiasmus here also, where the revelation of Christ and his covenants are the focus or peak or pinch of the chiasmus. And so I've broken it down here. I encourage you to read Ether 4. Let me just pull it up maybe. It's too long. I don't want to read it right now for everybody. So you can read that. But there is a nebulous chiasmus, right? I'm not going to claim like, oh, you go show this in your Sunday school class. Don't, right? It doesn't matter. But I see this pattern fitting what I'm talking about here. In verses 1 through 3, from the mount and his presence to hiding up the record and the earth. It would help to have it up to read these and compare these. Let's do it. I'm going to pull these up side by side real quick. Bear with me. Because I want to get this point across. I took time to write it. I think I want to do this all right. So verses 1 through 3, let's read them real quick. In Ether 4, and the Lord commanded the brother of Jared to go down out of the mount from the presence of the Lord and write the things which he had seen. And they were forbidden to come unto the children of men until after that he should be lifted up upon the cross. So this is after the brother of Jared has had the experience of seeing the Lord. Okay. And so he's in the Lord's mount and presence. This is where this is coming in. And he's told to hide up the record in the earth. And this is the promised land, or in the promised land of the Jaredites and the Josephites, right? Lehites and Gentile exoduses, like I just brought up there. So this is what 1 through 3 is. And it says in verse 2, and after Christ truly had showed himself unto this people, he commanded that they should be made manifest. And now, after that, They had all dwindled in unbelief. There is none save it be the Lamanites, and they have rejected the gospel of Christ. Therefore I am commanded that I should hide them up again in the earth. And this is the Book of Mormon going in the earth, and the sealed portion where Brother Jared's writings are, right, that they're being hidden within the land. So this is this idea. So going from the temple and the presence of God to a promised land, but then hiding the record and the story of it, the seals of it, as I would say there. Now, verses 6 through 8, let's jump there. For the Lord said unto me, they shall not go forth unto the Gentiles until the day that they shall repent of their iniquity and become clean before the Lord. And in that day they shall exercise faith in me, saith the Lord, even as the brother of Jared did, that they may become sanctified in me. And then I will manifest unto them the things which the brother of Jared saw, even to the unfolding unto them all my revelations, saith Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Father of the heavens and of the earth, and all things that in them are. And he that will contend against the word of the Lord, let him be accursed. And he that shall deny these things, let him be accursed. For unto them will I show no greater things, saith Jesus Christ, for I am he who speaketh. And so what did I write here as this part of the chiasmus is the first principles to sanctification. It's our mini mechanism of repentance, the thing that we built up in the first few episodes of our cosmic perspective here, right? It's these unto sanctification, so that what? So that we can receive the revelation. It's an invitation to revelation is what 6 through 8 is here, right? It says, not until they repent and get clean will I manifest unto them all of my revelations. So it's that invitation to come up to the mount and see, to go up to where Jared starts up here, but it's through these first principles, right? Now, verses 9 through 12, what did I write about here? I said, this is a part where we have the witness of heavenly power and source. And he that will not believe my words will not believe that I am. So this is where he's pointing to Jesus. Like, this will be the center apex, these two parts here. This is him declaring who he is, the God of heaven and of earth, and then moving into his covenants, what he'll do for us. So verses 9 through 12, center part, it says, and at my command the heavens are opened and are shut. And my word, this is famine type catastrophe language, right? Talking about the heavens. Also blessings, right? You can talk about a more generic soft tone level, Sunday school level. You can talk about the blessings of the Spirit. And at my word, the earth shall shake. Oh, but wait, here we're back in cosmic perspective, so we better keep it in context, right? Like, so we're talking about the heavens and the earth, and at my command, the inhabitants thereof shall pass away, even so as by fire. Wow, that sounds intense, right? So let's not flush this away as a softy thing, right? He's talking about, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am that cosmic God. And he that believeth not in my words believeth not my disciples. And if it so be that I do not speak, judge ye, for ye shall know that it is I that speaketh at the last day. But he that believeth not, or he that believeth these things which I have spoken, him will I visit with the manifestations of my Spirit. And he shall know and bear record. He shall see, right? He shall translate. He shall testify. For because of my Spirit, he shall know that these things are true, for it persuadeth men to do good. And whatsoever thing persuadeth men to do good is of me. For good cometh of none, save it shall be of me. I am the same that leadeth men to all good. He that will not believe my words will not believe me, that I am. And he that will not believe me will not believe the Father who sent me. For behold, I am the Father, I am the light, I am the life, and I am the truth of the world, or am the truth of the world. So this is his declaration of who he is, right? And normally in a chiasmus, Christ is at the center, right? Something to do with his coming, his birth, his something like this. That's what we're focusing on. That's what the cosmic perspective here is centered on. This is what the temple perspective is centered on. So this is why I'm pointing this out, is because I see this here. Now watch how it goes back down the chain of things. So verses 13 through 16, come unto me, O ye Gentiles, and I will show unto you the greater things. So here he goes back into seeing, in this invitation to revelation. Come unto me, and let me show you, right? I will show unto you the greater things, the knowledge which is hid up because of unbelief. Come unto me, O ye house of Israel, and it shall be made manifest unto you how great things the Father hath laid up for you from the foundation of the world, and hath not come unto you because of unbelief. Behold, when ye shall read that veil of unbelief which doth cause you to remain in your awful state of wickedness, and hardness of heart, and blindness of mind, then shall the great and marvelous things which have been hid up from the foundation of the world from you, yea, when ye shall call upon the Father in my name with a broken heart and a contrite spirit, then ye shall know that the Father hath remembered the covenant which he hath made unto our fathers, O house of Israel. And so here you have going back to our mini mechanism, right? The broken heart, contrite spirit, wrapping in this obedience. I think I'm jumping the gun on what I wrote here while I'm looking over cheating. So this is still part of the invitation of the Gentiles and the Israel in the last days to come up to Sinai for ourselves and seek the covenants of the Father. So again, it's this invitation up to revelation, to receive covenants, to see God, to the mountain, to the presence. And then what is this? What do I wrap it up here as? Book of Mormon is the fruit of this final chapter, having begun, start of John's revelation. Okay, but let's read 16 first, because I think it's included in this portion. If I've thoroughly confused you, I'm sorry. I apologize. This made sense at one point, and it still does to me. I'm just doing a terrible job of conveying it at the moment, I feel. But 16, let me finish this one. In verse 16, he says, "And then shall my revelations which I have caused to be written by my servant John be unfolded in the eyes of all the people. Remember, when ye see these things, ye shall know that the time is at hand, that they shall be made manifest in very deed. Therefore, when ye shall receive this record, ye may know that the work of the Father has commenced upon the face of the land." So this is where we're full circle back to this record was what? Pulled out of this earth that was hidden up, right? This is kind of what I'm getting at here. And what does that imply? Because up here, for the brother of Jared, he was at the mountain and presence of the Lord, or in the temple, right? Receiving his covenants and promises and seeing and the vision and the revelations, and he wrote them down, and he buried them in his promised land, okay? In this promised land. So where's the promised land portion? Well, it comes here in verses 18 and 19. So it says, once these things have started, know that John's revelation, and this is interesting, right? John's revelation, which he mentions, imitates verses 6 through 8, where he's talking about the first principles and our sanctification will give us revelation, will let us see, will let us come up to the mount, which supports my entire push to say, hey, all these visions are a one vision. It's the revelation. Daniel, Ezekiel, Ezra, Amos, John, Lehi, brother of Jared, they're all seeing the one vision, the revelation. And that's what's being invited here. Front and back, front and center, up and down, chapter 4 is what I see. It's a big mountain, goes up. I'm Jesus. I'm the one giving it. This is the revelation. I've given it to him. I had to hide it because of unbelief. And if you'll just not be unbelief or full of unbelief and believe in me, I will show you that these things are true. And you will see that John's vision, his revelation, which I gave to him, starts to come past, right? And what's the fruit of that, or what's the product of believing and seeing these things, is the millennial kingdom. And we'll read that here in verses 18 and 19. He says, therefore, in Ether 4, verse 18, therefore, repent all ye ends of the earth, and come unto me, and believe in my gospel, and be baptized in my name. For he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. And signs shall follow them that believe in my name. And blessed is he that is found faithful unto my name at that last day, for he shall be lifted up to dwell in the kingdom prepared for him from the foundation of the world. For it is I that hath spoken it. Amen. And the kingdom, and this whole qualification there is the promised land. I mean, this is the millennial kingdom. This is our celestial, eternal designation, our inheritance, right? So maybe it's a stretch. I think now I see, as I'm trying to explain it again, it's a stretch. I think in the moment I was really seeing this very powerfully. And perhaps if I wasn't under the stress here of recording, I could practice conveying that a bit better, or do a diagram to show it a bit better. But I feel that it's there, and it witnesses to this cycle of catastrophe, this offering of protection through covenants by coming up to the presence of God, or the temple. So, point 2, the Lord goes before them in a cloud, in Ether, right? This is what he leads them out of the area of the Tower of Babel, or out of Mesopotamia, by a cloud. And this is also described as the presence of the Lord. And these are electromagnetic or plasmatic in nature, is what I say, right? And we read Ether 2, 5, and 14, and let's read a little bit about it. It says, and it came to pass that the Lord commanded them that they should go forth into the wilderness, yea, into that quarter where never had been man. And it came to pass that the Lord did go before them, and did talk with them as he stood in a cloud, and gave directions whither they should travel. And this is just like the Exodus. So we're talking about pillar of fire and a cloud. This is the imagery. And it came to pass at the end of 4 years that the Lord came again unto the brother of Jared, and stood in a cloud and talked with him. And for the space of 3 hours did the Lord talk with the brother of Jared, and chastened him, because he remembered not to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, I included this picture from the Prince of Egypt. The descriptions are very electric plasma universe in nature, like when he's showing Moses' interactions with the burning bush, the cloud, the pillar, that kind of stuff. It's very, very plasma. And this is how I imagine as well the cloud. And we'll see that this is exactly how the OG Living Scriptures episode of the Brother of Jared also depicts it. So again, something in the water that this is the kind of cloud we're talking about. It's electromagnetic plasma. So again, ching, there's a check mark on our acid test for, hey, does this fit this story in the Book of Mormon here? Yeah, absolutely. Oh, but there's more, because next point, 16 glowstones. So in this part of the Jaredite Exodus, the brother of Jared is commanded to build 8 arks or barges. Now think of the symbolism of 8 in the flood, in a baptism, and 8 survivors of the flood, right? They were buried in the ocean, and also 8 being in the age of circumcision, which I didn't include in this essay, but is another point of doctrine and scriptural occurrence that maps onto this mythological understanding of Jupiter having, castrated his father Saturn, and that this covenant, this blood covenant of cutting the foreskin, the missing phallus of Osiris idea, like it's going to map on really well to all of these things we're opening up, this box that we're opening up. So just keep that in mind. I mean, I didn't go into it in depth here because I wasn't prepared to. And again, it's kind of a more down there, you'll get to it kind of thing. Okay. Israel was also symbolically baptized collectively too, as they passed through the water of the Red Sea and again through Jordan with Joshua in the next generation. So you have this collective baptism happening with these barges as they go across the sea to a new land. So you have even like the same thing it's talking about in Ether 4, this baptism and washing and receiving a promised land or a kingdom. It's happening here physically through their actions, their lives, by building these barges and having these problems. And we get lost in the little stories of the day-to-day of the gathering the bees and there's this and that. And we're so worried about Sally down the street and her casserole. And we fail to see how we are playing out these patterns like a fractal again, like a crystal. Like this is why I think it's so repetitive when we're reading the scriptures and seeing these stories and seeing these cycles, is that we're a part of it, and we just need to find out first which part, admit it, and then we can be more effective for the Lord in shaping those around us to straighten up to the plumb line, to become part of the crystal formation kind of idea, to become one with Zion, become one of the hive. Okay, so we have this symbolic baptism with the 8 barges. They use these barges, the 8, to cross the ocean, the American hemisphere. Okay, but they were created like submarines, and there was an issue among other issues with them. But one issue was how to find light in the ships during their journey, and this is the story everybody talks about. The solution that the brother of Jared employs fits within an electromagnetic paradigm where stones hold and transmit light, or bones even. The fact that they are charged by the finger of Jehovah, a light being, completes the circuit. This is a possible echo of the Sohar of Noah's Ark as well. Perhaps Mahanrai Moriankur is the name of brother of Jared, as revealed by Joseph Smith, had knowledge of that detail and drew upon it as a solution for a catastrophic boat situation. Right? What do you go to? You go to the same temple ark that you heard your fathers talk about and how they survived the darkness. You would think that there might be a way that God could also provide a glowing stone to provide light in the darkness during your own expedition into the deep. No pun intended. Perhaps, okay. Go back up to see how Genesis 16, oh man, what did I just do? Genesis 16, 6:16a even references this very comparison. We'll see it later, so I'm not gonna click on it now. But if you go to Genesis 6:16a, it references this event in Ether and the 16 stones, the same as the Sohar, the window of the ark. As I've said before, but your LED and LCD screen is also a technology that uses stones or crystals to store and transmit light. Today, there are many examples of crystal luminescence, or concepts even like piezoelectricity, where you're sparking a stone to create light as well. Like your common lighter uses this type of technology, or you can tap stones to create light, kind of thing. These are things that we're starting to understand and utilize and bring to life. A lot of the technologies we take for granted are already utilizing these things, and most people don't even know it. So these things today are considered, honestly, they bring seemingly strange or miraculous scenarios like the 16 stones. They bring them more aligned with the realities that we have discovered and use in recent post-restoration history. We now know the ability of certain stones or crystals to hold and transmit light and energy exists and is extremely useful. This isn't radical narrative anymore that many portray it as when they attack or mock our faith, and Joseph Smith in particular, and seeing stones. Seeing stones and light are a part of the fabric of eternal reality. Remember, I'm out here talking about the white stone and a crystal heart to hold celestial light. We're looking up every day at a celestial sphere named the sun, and we look forward to the day when the earth will be made as a celestial crystal sphere. Like, I don't understand the holdup with seeing stones. check it out how it's depicted in the OG Living Scriptures animation. I'm not going to watch the whole video, but I do have the pictures that I wanted to show, where it definitely looks like a plasma cloud, lightning cloud, light body Jesus straight up in the house. So, fourth point here that we'll bring up for the brother of Jared and the 16 stones. Ether chapter 3, verses 19 through 28, the Urim and Thummim is brought into picture again. So right on cue, we have yet another instance of electromagnetic or crystal light stones as a supportive node for our cosmic perspective. And I'm not going to read it, but it's there. I just included scripture. And then last point for this event story is it's in the context that it's taking place during a cosmic catastrophe, like we talked about with the winds, the huracan. So Book of Mormon scriptures for Tower of Babel, tight like a dish, conditions of the wind and sea. What Book of Mormon scriptures for? Oh, this might have been a note to me. I probably shouldn't include that. It's all good. Ether 2:20. Okay, so these are just the scriptures that kind of attribute to ideas that would support this idea of a cosmic catastrophe, that they had to make the ships tight like a dish. Well, why? Because there is going to be some real heavy waves, some big things. Like Nephi didn't have to build a submarine to cross the oceans. Maybe they were different places, sure, but all other records point to there were some crazy cosmic catastrophes going on at this time. And so this was a means to survive or work through or be helped through by the Lord, a crazy situation, an unprecedented situation. Now, here's a term, ionic winds. Ionic winds, they dry things up, okay? So electrical winds, think of them that way. Ionic winds that dry things up and cause famine and plague are a hallmark of a cosmic plasma electric event. For a sample of what I'm getting at, here's a video in the vein of electric geology that expresses the power of the wind and its electric origin. Now, for the read, we'll listen to the first few minutes is all to get the abstract, and then you can switch. You can watch the rest on your own. I didn't want a full screen. I just wanted to play it.
Welcome to Space News from the Electric Universe, brought to you by the
Thunderbolts Project. I just tried to speed it up and broke everything, guys. Sorry.
Project
it's because I'm in edit mode.
Thunderbolts.info.
Whatever.
In the first 3 parts of this presentation, Thunderbolts contributor Andrew Hall has explored the electrical nature of wind and powerful storms on planets throughout the solar system, including Earth. Of course, mainstream geology tells us that wind plays a significant role in shaping the landscape of our planet, supposedly incrementally over countless eons of time. But as Andrew has proposed in numerous past videos, the Earth's wind-sheared landscape reveals unique patterns which may have been produced by ionized shockwaves in primordial electric storms. In part 4 of this 10-part series, Andrew argues for a new perspective on wind in Earth geology, not as a slow erosional force, but a short-lived and violent one.
If you study Earth's surface and look at details in its form, there are obvious patterns. Arcing patterns of mountain ranges and island chains, strange swirls and looping cracks on the ocean floor, and on close inspection there's harmony in the shape of mountains and other terrain. Sometimes it's geometric with triangles, arcs, and star patterns, but usually it's more fluid, like a crazy paisley. Consensus thought is this is a result of a series of unrelated events that occurred over billions of years, driven by the slow churn of Earth's crust subducting the continental plates and the constant wear of erosion.
So that he provided the standard model there. Those things that you were just seeing there on the screen, that they took billions of years to form.
Thinks it didn't happen that way. We think it was caused by electricity, and the patterns we see make more sense if viewed in the context of our theory. The face of the Earth was shaped by 3 primary means: volcanic eruption, lightning, and wind. It occurred in primordial storms which ionized the atmosphere, charged the ground like a battery, and discharged energy the same way we see today: earthquakes, volcanoes, and storms. Only these storms were beyond biblical. They occurred before man arrived. What we are talking about today are the storms of creation, which shaped the face of the planet. Because wind played the biggest role in laying...
They say before man arrived, and I say, yeah, sure, these same types of things helped in initial creation, but that these same types of events are what have reshaped the world through various catastrophes, like the Hebrew cosmogony that we were just mentioning, where the world goes through cycles and each age is destroyed by a different planet, kind of thing. And that's exactly what we're talking about. And he's getting that too. I think he's just, just want to clarify.
And piling the sediments we live on, its effects are most visible. The evidence is in supersonic shock waves imprinted on the land. Once you start recognizing the characteristics of wind-form topography, it becomes almost impossible to ignore. To identify wind direction, look at mountains. Mountains, not volcanoes, are all essentially wind-blown dunes. With exceptions for shifting wind conditions, a mountain's shape will show a windward and leeward side like a dune. The leeward side is generally steep and slab-sided, and the windward side dips at a shallower slope. The windward side actually portrays the shape of the wind itself, as pressure waves undulate across movable sands and mold them. If the wind reaches Mach speeds, standing shock waves reflect from any protrusion in the wind's path, causing a sharp change in wind direction. Distinct patterns form at this crease, called shock diamonds, where the wind direction changes abruptly. The reflected standing shock wave forms a fan-shaped interference pattern of compression and rarefaction. This pattern can be found on most mountain forms, including Cordillera Mountain arcs, continental divides, lone Inselbergs, and basin and range.
And if you're just listening, he's showing imagery at the same time of what this looks like in a laboratory and how they can reproduce it with ionic winds and things like that, but also just all over in the landscape. Once you start to see these patterns and you look at how different mountains are formed or what they look like, the shapes they take, or the contours and topography that is there, it's, like I would say, in my perspective, now I see everything as having an electromagnetic plasma origin, especially because I live out here in Arizona, and these plains from the Mogollon Rim down or down up above in the highlands, like looking at the caverns, the Grand Canyon, the Crater Canyon, there's just so much like melted material that looks like lightning storms like he's describing just rolled through, or that are described in the Book of Mormon, as we'll get to eventually, right? Lightning storms like had never been seen before happened in this area. And that's exactly what he's describing here as having shaped these mountains, this ionic wind and these types of other things that accompany an electric event that happens during planetary catastrophe. Okay, when when the Earth's ionosphere gets charged up, boom, all these things can happen. Volcanoes go off, earthquakes happen, hurricanes form, winds are shot down, fire from heaven, oil even come down from the sky, and different particles mixing. All kinds of stuff that can happen during this type of catastrophe. And it fits really well into these biblical narratives and scriptural narratives that we're exploring. I don't know how much more of this I want to watch. The rest of the video is great, but admittedly, I'm not a huge geology. I don't have a lot of geology knowledge. I love to look at the patterns, and so I'll watch because of the patterns, but it's incredibly dry even for me in terms of the technical side of it. But if you're into that, and I mean, there's a lot of electric geology videos on the Thunderbolts Project channel from Andrew Hall and others as well. And there are some great independent channels out there that are doing backyard garage experiments and reproducing these similar things. Like that's the beauty of it, is that this is truly theory and speculation that can be supported by actual experimentation, that you don't need like $1 billion funding from the government to do, kind of thing. Except the higher plasma discharge stuff, you kind of need some approval and some coin for nuclear reactors or that kind of stuff. Okay, I found also a dozen or so pages from Hugh Nibley that I'm going to read for the podcast version that support this point with power. You can follow along or read it for yourself in Nibley's Collected Works, Volume 5, pages 163 through 181. And I've got that in front of me here. So I'm just going to go ahead and start reading these. This will be good. It might be kind of boring for some of you, but I'm going to read this bottom portion here. Is what it says here. While the whole book is great and has many great gems that we could point out and connect dots to, I'm only going to read 4 short essays or letters from Nibley in the World of the Jaredites section, titled The Tower, the Stolen Garment, the Dispersion, and a Note to the Weather, or a note on the weather. So let's read these real quick. So again, this is just from Hugh Nibley's book about these types of things. Let's see if what he's saying maps onto all this stuff I've already kind of been going over. So here's the first one, called The Tower. And he's writing correspondence. A lot of Nibley's books, they're collections of his writings. It's not like you read through a straight narrative, or he wrote a book in an order that you would. So kind of you're peeking in on a conversation he's having with a professor. Here it says, Dear Professor F, and I had the thought as I was reading this before too, that this is like long-form Twitter debate threads going on between academics, and we get a glimpse of it from Nibley's journal notes here, essentially. So this one's called The Tower, page 163. Dear Professor F, in reply to my sustained blast of the 17th of the month, you tax me with this, or with a, in quotes now, naive and gullible acceptance of the Tower of Babel story. I knew you would. Most people believe quite naively that Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address, but their total uncritical acceptance of the fact does not prevent it from being true. You may accept any story naively, or you may take it critically. What would you say if I were to accuse you of being very simple and gullible in rejecting the story of the tower? So he flips it on his head. The guy's like, your naive and gullible acceptance of the Tower of Babel story is like a quotation he had in his letter back to Nibley. So Nibley claps back and is like, what if I told you were the one that was naive? And so he goes on. He says, the cornerstone of sound scholarship, in quotes, air quotes, in our day is the comfortable doctrine that the answer no can never quite be as wrong as the answer yes, a proposition which, to my knowledge, has never been demonstrated. Excuse me if I seem recalcitrant, but I find it odd that the one skill most appreciated and rewarded in those circles where one hears everlastingly of the inquiring mind and the importance of finding out for oneself is the gift and power of taking things for granted. Even our Latter-day Saint intellectuals are convinced that the way to impress the Gentiles is not to acquire a mastery in their critical tools, how few even know Latin, but simply to defer in all things to their opinions. Think back, my good man, to the first act of recorded history. What meets our gaze as the curtain rises? People building towers everywhere, or people everywhere building towers. And why are they building towers? To get to heaven. The tower was, to use the Babylonian formula, the Marcus Shem U Irsitim, the binding place of heaven and earth. Where alone, and think of this is Leland talking, think of this in context of our idea of the tower being a temple, right? And the temple being this binding pillar, this cosmic pillar, the tree of life that binds heaven to earth, the Liga, the religion, binding us back to heaven. Back to Nibley, page 164. Where alone could one establish contact with the upper and lower worlds? Where alone one could, so the tower is a place where alone one could establish contact with the upper and lower worlds. That goes not only for Babylonia, but also for the whole ancient world, as I have pointed out at merciless lengths in my recent study on the hierocentric state. And he quotes himself. The towers were artificial mountains, as the textbook will tell you, and no temple complex could be one without one. The labors of Dombart, Jeremias, Andre, Burroughs, and others will spare us the pains of showing you these towers scattered everywhere throughout the old world as a means of helping men to get to heaven. The legends concerning them are legion, meaning many, but they all fall into the same pattern. In the beginning, an ambitious race of men tried to get to heaven by climbing a mountain or tower. They failed and then set out to conquer the world. A thoroughly typical version of the story is a variant found in Jewish and Christian apocryphal writers, in the which the sons of Seth, angels in some versions, so this is getting into the Watchers a bit. He says, angels in some versions, eager to regain the paradise of Adam that Adam had lost, went up on Mount Hermon, and there lived the lives of righteous asceticism, calling themselves the Watchers, the sons of Elohim. It was an attempt to establish the heavenly order, Zion. It failed. The embittered colony descending the mountain to break the covenant married the daughters of Cain and beget a race of men notorious for murders and robberies. Determined to possess the earth if they could not possess heaven, the men of the mountain denied that they had failed, faked the priesthood, and forced the inhabitants of the earth to accept the kings they put over them. This story you will recognize as an obvious variant of the extremely ancient and widespread Mad Hunter cycle, which I treated you in an article, and now he's referring to some other thing called the Mad Hunter cycle, and so he'll talk about it a little bit, but he says, the Mad Hunter, you'll recall, claimed to be the rightful ruler of the universe, the Cosmocrator. He challenged God to an archery contest and built a great tower from which he hoped to shoot his arrows into heaven. Sir James Fraser has collected a large number of American Indian versions. This is Nimrod, by the way, the Mad Hunter archetype right there, straight up. And he's talking about the tower, so that's who he's referring to in this. But Sir James Fraser, this is back to Nibley. Sir James Fraser has collected a large number of American Indian versions of the story to illustrate old world parallels. And the tale is met with among primitive hunters, for the tale is met with among primitive hunters throughout the world. In Genesis 10:4, we read that Nimrod, the mighty hunter against the Lord, founded the kingdom of Babel. And in the next chapter, that Babel was the name of the tower built to reach heaven. This Nimrod seems to be the original archetype of the Mad Hunter. His name is for the Jews at all times the very symbol of rebellion against God and of the usurped authority. It was who became a hunter of men, established false priesthood and false kingship in the earth, an imitation of God's rule, and made all men to sin. A very Christian writing tells how Noah's descendants waged bitter war amongst themselves after his death to see who should possess his kingship. Finally, one of the blood of Ham prevailed, and from him the Egyptians, Babylonians, and Persians derived their priesthood and kingship. From the race of Ham, says the text. through the race of Ham, says the text, came one through the magical as opposed to the holy succession named Nimrod, who was a giant against the Lord, page 166, whom the Greeks called Zoroaster, and who ruled the world, forcing all men by his false magical arts to recognize his authority. The Chronicon Partial reports a widespread tradition that this giant who built Babylon was not only the first king of Persia, the earthly cosmocrator, but also the first man to teach the killing and eating of beasts, a belief also expressed in the Quran. There is another common tradition that Nimrod's crown was a fake, and that he ruled without right in the earth over all the sons of Noah, and that they were all under his power and counsel, while he did not go into the ways of the Lord, and was more wicked than all men were before him. The antiquity of these stories may be judged from an early Babylonian account of the wicked king who first mingled small and great on the mound, and caused them to sin, earning for himself the title of King of the Noble Mound, King of the Mountain. Think of it. CF the Tower. Oh, he's citing again the Tower. Okay. God of Lawlessness. He's quoting in quotes like a title that he's also giving. He's giving titles to this guy, earning the titles for this wicked king. He was the King of the Noble Mound. He was also the God of Lawlessness and the God of No Government. In the very earliest Indo-European traditions, this person is Dahak, the type of the Dregvant. I don't know how to pronounce that. The man of the lie and the king of madmen, who sat on the throne for 1,000 years and forced all men to subscribe their names to the book of the dragon, thus making them subject to him. This recalls the very ancient tradition that when Seth succeeded Adam in the priesthood, he ordered a special record to be kept, which was called the Book of Life and which was concealed from the sons of Cain. There you have the dark, again, metaphor, this dueling binary of books of life versus the book of the dragon. The dragon's book was an imitation of this. There is a constant tendency in ancient records to confuse Jemshid, Jemshid, the founder of the earthly kingship and the father of the human race, not with Adam, but with the false Adam or usurper. In the book of Ether, and this, it's funny because Nimrod and Gilgamesh is also parallel, like Zoroaster by the Greeks, it's Gilgamesh in the Mesopotamian tradition kind of thing. So, and just think of recent conversation, like I don't even know if I want to bring it up. Okay. In the book of Ether, the name of Nimrod is attached to the valley which was northward and which led into that quarter where the men had never had been, which suits very well with the legendary character of Nimrod as the mad hunter of the steppes. The name of Nimrod has always baffled philologians, people who study names, I think, right? Or I'm pretty sure, who have never been able to locate it. Though Kraling now accepts Edward Meyer's much doubted theory that the name is Egypto-Libyan, which suits well with our own belief regarding the curse of Ham, but at the end of the last century, the explorer and scholar Emin found the name attached to legends, mostly of the Mad Hunter variety, and placed names in the region of Lake Van, the Great Valley system due north of the upper Mesopotamia. So he's just kind of pinpointing with the new scholarship and stuff that this name, this person, it does trace back to this Egyptian / Libyan or Mesopotamian type area, is all he's saying. Okay, so now in page 176, he continues. Now, I'm not insisting for a minute that the legendary Nimrod existed. As I told you before, I'm only interested in the type of thing that happened. So he's not like trying to say all this to prove that he existed, is what he said, but just that the pattern or the type of thing happened. And after having examined hundreds of legends from all parts of the ancient world, all telling substantially the same story, I think that anyone would find it difficult, in view of the evidence, to deny that there was some common event behind them. It seems to have been a single event, moreover. So there's Nibley's take, exactly kind of pointing to what we're talking about, that this is right, this is real, and the scholarly work should be obvious to anybody who's looking at it with open eyes. How so, he says? I said above that we find mounds, towers, and accompanying rituals throughout the whole ancient world. Now, I will go further and say that these mounds and towers and great cult complexes that go with them were not so many independent local inventions, but actually imitations derived ultimately from a single original. That's the doctrine of diffusion that we're talking about. Every great national shrine of antiquity had a founding legend of how in the beginning it was brought through the air. It was brought through the air from some mysterious faraway land. And this faraway land turns out to have been in Central Asia. Our Norse Othin came from the giants' land in the east. The Greek national cult from the land of the Hyperboreans. Far in the northeast of Greece, people in the Near East looked to a mysterious white mountain in the north as the seat of their primordial cult. Chinese to the paradise or the mountain of the west, and so forth. You may list various founding, and what he's pointing at is all these, he's pointing to these mythological traditions of a sacred mountain in the east, or the Orient is how it should be translated in our perspective, because Orient is east, but if the Orient or the pole was once north, and that's where the temple was, then you would have this idea of northeast being where the temple is in certain areas. Also, the position of the earth as it approached capture, I think, plays a part into this, why it specifically is the northeast as opposed to north directly. But that's getting too much into the weeds with it. Needless to say, what Nibley's saying here is, again, mapping really well onto our cosmic perspective that incorporates all this coherent story of mythology, this patternism kind of type thing. Okay, and it's not patternism in the academic sense. I know there's a specific definition tied to that, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about seeing patterns for all of you word souls out there. Hold up. I got to catch my place again in the book here. Page 167. He's talking about all these people. Talked about this shrine mountain of antiquity having been in the east or the north, depending on where they're from. You may, or for the Chinese in the west, right, pointing back to the north. You may list the various founding legends and trace them back at your leisure to a single point of origin. I find it strange that the founding father and summus deus of each nation of antiquity is somewhere declared to be a fraud and an impostor, a wandering tramp from afar whose claims to supreme authority cannot stand a too careful examination. Think of Prometheus's challenge to Zeus, and of Loki's blackmailing of Othin, and the dubious justification of Osiris, of the terror of Almighty Anu when Tiamat challenges his authority. What he's doing is he's giving the same archetype, this same imposter, right, who takes the throne basically, but he's jumping from tradition to ancient tradition. Kind of like how I do when you're talking about, well, and then the Aztecs said this, and then the Indians said this, and then the Red Dot Indian said this, and this, blah, blah, like I'm jumping from different place in the world to world because their collective witness adds more power. He's doing the same thing, using the proper names of these imposters, kings. And then he says, page 168, continuing on, run down these legends, and you will find in every case that the usurper comes from Central Asia. Even Isaiah 14:12-14, recalls that in the beginning the adversary himself set up his throne upon the mountain of the assembly of the regions of the north, and there pretended to be like the Most High. Even Mount Hermon would have been in this northern area of the continent and stuff, even before the flood, when they would go up to the north kind of thing. Okay, where am I at? For all this, a single origin is indicated. Whether historical or ritual makes little difference. He says, there is one aspect of the Nimrod cycle that is too interesting to pass by, especially for an anthropologist. That is the tradition of the stolen garment. Now he goes into the next essay, and we'll read it. Stolen garment. Nimrod claimed, and this I'm reading this because, too, it supports and plays into of king and kings kingdoms that we, in the previous article, this idea of the garment as well, again, adding another layer of it, no pun intended. So let's read this. The stolen garment, page 168. Nimrod claimed kingship on the ground of victory over his enemies. His priesthood, however, he claimed by virtue of possessing the garment of Adam. The legends of the Jews assure us that it was by virtue of owning this garment that Nimrod was able to claim power to rule over the whole earth, and that he sat in his tower while men came and worshipped him. The apocryphal writers, Jewish and Christian, have a good deal to say about this garment. To quote one of them, the garment of skin which God made for Adam and his wife when they were cast out of the garden were given, after the death of Adam, to Enoch. Hence they passed to Methuselah and then to Noah, from whom Ham stole them as the people were leaving the ark. Ham's grandson, Nimrod, obtained them from his father Cush. As for the legitimate inheritance of this clothing, a very old fragment recently discovered says that Michael disrobed Enoch of his earthly garments and put on him his angelic clothing, taking him into the presence of God. This garment of Enoch was supposed to be the very garment of skins that John the Baptist wore, called by the early Christians the garment of Elias. In Arabic, an Arabic source, the Life of John the Baptist, says that Gabriel brought it down to John from heaven as the garment of Elijah, and it went back. Says John Chrysostom, to the beginning of the world, to the times before which Adam required covering. Thus it is the symbol of repentance. Others believed it was the same garment that Herod and later the Romans put under lock and key when they wished to prevent the people from putting it on a candidate of their own choice, and tell how the Jews tried to seize the garment by force and put it on John the Baptist, thus making him, instead of Herod, their high priest. Whatever its origin, the wearing of the garment of repentance, symbolic of life of man in his fallen state, was known to the most ancient Christians and practiced by certain ultra-conservative cults down to modern times. Incidentally, the story of the stolen garment, as told by the old rabbis, including the great Eliezer, calls for an entirely different rendering of the strange story in Genesis 9 from the versions in our King James Bible. They seem to think that the erwath of Genesis 9:22 did not mean nakedness at all, but it should be given its primary root meaning of skin covering. Read thus, we are to understand that Ham took the garment of his father while he was sleeping and showed it to his brethren. Shem and Japheth, who took a pattern or copy of it, a salma, or else a woven garment like it, a simla, which they put upon their own shoulders, returning the skin of garment to their father. Upon awakening, Noah recognized the priesthood of 2 of his sons, but cursed the son who tried to rob him of his garment. By an extremely common type of substitution, the simla, which is this woven garment imitation, in Genesis 9:23, could very easily stand for an original simla, or a copy imitation pattern, by an equally common type of transposition of salma, a garment or mantle. All right, there's a little more on this one. Bear with me. I know it sounds a little dry, but keep through this on Nibbly. You're going to see the same theme erupt as you push through. So as in Micah 2:8, even as it stands, simla means only the woven garment that can hardly refer to its original skin article. Thus is, apparently, the source of the widespread legend that Ham stole the garment of Noah and claimed to possess the priesthood by virtue of his illegal insignia. Ham's descendants, Cush and Nimrod, both Africans, though Nimrod, in his wandering moved to Asia, made the same claim. It is interesting that according to certain ancient scriptures, which Latter-day Saints claim have been restored by revelation in our own age, Pharaoh, who represents the Afro-Asian line of Cush Nimrod, was blessed as to the kingship, but cursed as to the priesthood. And he offered Abraham the privilege of wearing his own royal insignia in hope that Abraham would return the compliment by allowing the Pharaoh to wear his priestly ones. According to the very old tradition, Pharaoh coveted the priesthood of Moses, exactly as his ancestor Nimrod did that of Abraham. And it was said that the pharaohs of Egypt dressed in the skin garment to show that their origin was older than time itself. Now, a couple more paragraphs on the garment. According to the Talmud, Nimrod's great success in hunting was due to the fact that he wore the coat of skin, which God made for Adam and Eve. There is a tradition that Nimrod, becoming jealous of the rival hunter Esau, so much for the chronology, is in parentheses an exclamation point. Because, now you have Esau and Nimrod going at it. Because Nimrod supposedly is slain by Esau in the forest. And that's when Esau sells his birthright to Jacob for porridge or whatever to escape the consequences of the murder and stealing the garment and that kind of thing. He gets the cursed garment instead. So it says, there's a tradition that Nimrod, becoming jealous of the rival hunter Esau, so much for chronology, lay in ambush for him, but was defeated by Esau, who cut off his head and took the valuable garments of Nimrod, with which Nimrod prevailed over the whole land, or earth, and he ran and concealed them in his house. These garments, says the report, were nothing less than the birthright which Esau later sold to Jacob. 2 significant conclusions come from all this. That any historical reconstruction of what actually happened is out of the question, he says. What has come down to us being a mass of conflicting legends and reports. And 2, that these conflicting legends and reports nevertheless agree on certain main points. This is what I keep harping at, what I just said when I interjected in the middle of this kind of drier reading from Nibbly from me. I'm sorry, I'm trying to bring it to life a little bit. But that the bigger picture and pattern is what we're recognizing. He says, the main points are that they are very old, and they were considered by most learned Jews to present matters of great importance, whose significance escaped later ages. The priests and kings of antiquity certainly wore such garments, and the skin garment was often imitated in woven materials. In fact, the skin garment was itself held to be a substitute for a still older garment made out of the leaves of the Ficus religiosus, I make no apology for conducting you into these lost bypaths of the past, he says. You have often proclaimed it your professional obligation to be interested in all things, and especially the unusual. Still, there is such a thing as going too far, and it is high time I was showing you what a sober, factual, and common sense document the Book of Ether really is. Let us return to Babel. I love his style of writing. This is the end of the garment one. I want to read 2 more, and there's only about 4 pages, so it should be a bit shorter. This one's called The Dispersion, and the last one will be called A Note on the Weather. And these are all still in the context of Nimrod, the Tower of Babel, and this catastrophe now is where we're going to see more of the language coming from. I think the stolen garment that we just read there was more about the priesthood authority. This will play a role. I'm glad we read it because this will come up again when we get into Abraham next and the sacrifice of him by the priest of Elkanah. So 1 second. Okay. The Book of Ether. This is called the article titled Dispersion, page 172. The Book of Ether, depicting the uprooting and scattering from the tower of a numerous population, shows them going forth not individually but in groups, and not merely family groups, but groups of friends and associates. And he's quoting now Ether 141. It says, "Thy friends and their families, and the friends of Jared and their families." There was no point in having Jared's language unconfounded if there was to be no one he could talk to, and his brother cried to the Lord that his friends might also retain the language. The same, however, would apply to any other language. If every individual were to speak a tongue, all of his own, and so go off entirely by himself, the races would have been merely scattered but quite annihilated. Oh, wait. Let me read that one more time. If every individual were to speak a tongue all of his own, and so go off entirely by himself, the races would have been not merely scattered but quite annihilated. We must not fall into the old vice of reading into the scriptures things that are not there. There is nothing said in our text about every man suddenly speaking a new language. We are told in the Book of Ether that languages were confounded with and by the confounding of the people. Cry unto the Lord, says Jared, that he will not confound us, that we may not understand our words. The statement is significant for more than one thing. How can it possibly be said that we may not understand our words? Words we cannot understand may be nonsense syllables or may be in some foreign language, but in either case, they are not our words. The only way we can fail to understand our own words is to have words that are actually ours change their meaning among us. That is exactly what happens when people, and hence languages, are either confounded, that is, mixed up, or scattered. In Ether's account, the confounding of people is not to be separated from the confounding of their languages. They are and have always been one and the same process. The Lord, we are told, in Ether 1:35-37, did not confound the language of Jared, and Jared and his brothers were not confounded. And the Lord had compassion upon their friends and their families also, and they were not confounded. That confound, he uses in quotes, as used in the Book of Ether, is meant to have its true and proper meaning of to pour together, to mix together, confound. It is clear from the prophecy in Ether 13:8 that the remnant of the house of Joseph shall be built upon this land, and they shall no more be confounded. The word here meaning mixed up with other people, culturally, linguistically, or otherwise. Yet another important biblical expression receives welcome elucidation from our text. Though Ether says nothing about the whole earth being of one language and one speech, like it does in Genesis 11:1, he does give us an interesting hint as to how those words may have been taken. Just as son and descendant are the same word in Hebrew, and so may easily be confused by translators who in fact have no way of knowing, save from the context in which sense the word is to be understood. So earth and land are the same word, and the well-known Eretz. In view of the fact that the Book of Ether, speaking only of the Jaredites, notes that there were none of the fair sons and daughters upon the face of the whole earth who repented of their sins, it would seem the common whole earth, or kol ha'eretz, of the Old Testament need not always be taken to mean the entire globe. Certainly it is quite as legitimate to think of the days of Peleg as the time when, as the old Jewish writers describe it, the children of Noah began to divide the earth amongst themselves, as without the least authority to visualize the drifting of the continents or the rending apart of the terrestrial globe. He says, a reader's first reaction to the ancient and fragmentary text usually becomes a lifelong credo, though research and revelation have combined in latter days to discredit this obvious and easy solution of the mysteries. The book of Ether, like First Nephi, is, when we come to examine it, heavily weighted in the direction of sober and factual history and was never meant to be a springboard for the imagination. For example, our record does not attribute the scattering of the people, as one might innocently suppose it does, to the confusion of tongues. After the brother of Jared had been assured that he and his people and their languages would not be confounded, the question of whether they would be driven out of the land still remained to be answered. That was another issue, and it was obvious that the language they had, they spoke had as little to do with driving them out of the land as it did with determining their destination. It was something else that drove the reluctant Jaredites from their homes. What could have forced them to leave? Okay, let me just pause with that question right there. I'm going to sum up all that I just read there in that last few minutes. Basically, he's saying it wasn't just the confusion of their languages that forced them to leave. Something else had to force them to leave. History, I'm continuing on, page 174. History, to be sober and factual, need not deal with the dull, normal, and everyday. The confounding and scattering of the people of the Tower was no slow working out of the historical process. It was sudden and terrible, and the Book of Ether gives the clearest possible indication of what caused it. But this introduces a theme on which it is impossible for me to speak with brevity, and I know the feel. Let us consign it to a later communication. But now he does make a note on the weather, and here's where he says, Dear F, again, it is gratifying to know that you have at last read the Book of Ether and found that it is not, in spite of its name, chloroform in print. The thing to which you are now objecting, the extravagant and overdone account of how they crossed the ocean, is the very thing to which my last letter was leading. We ended, you will recall, with the observation that it must have been something terrific that drove the Jaredites out of the land. What was it? The Burans of Central Asia are terrible at all times. And ancient and modern travelers tell of most unbelievable but uniform tales of those appalling winds. Those are winds, apparently, right? Appalling winds which almost daily shift vast masses of sand, dust, and even gravel from one part of the continent to another. The great Loess deposits of the eastern and western fringes of the vast area bear witness to even more dreadful dust storms that accompany the drying up of land after the glacial epoch. But it is when the world's weather gets out of hand, as it has a number of times in the course of history, that the blowing sands of Asia bring mighty empires to ruin, bury great cities in almost overnight, and scatter the tribes in all directions to overrun and submerge the more favored civilizations of the east and west. The weather of he's saying the weather of Asia, the east winds, right, is what he's going to be referring here to. But he's fishing the correspondence with this other professor who's having a hard time believing the Book of Ether. We'll put it that way, right? He's fishing him and hooking him like a hunter, like a good minister, like a good teacher, with things that he'll easily accept. And so he's showing him how, the winds in Asia and how they cause this and that, and this and that, and you know how they're attributed in history to this. So he's building common ground with him to show him how there was a catastrophe happening, basically. And he may never and will never use the words like I use, like a cosmic catastrophe, a planetary event, but he's doing the groundwork to get there. So he says, let me continue, page 175. The weather of Asia is the great central driving mechanism of world history. It is only in recent years that men have begun to correlate the great migrations of history with their attendant wars and revolutions, and those major weather crises, such as the great wind and drought of 2300 to 2200 BC, and the world floods of 1300 BC, which we now know to have taken place in the course of recorded history, so hypnotized have students of, and those two floods he mentioned, or those two events right there, those are the ones we're talking about. This 2200 BC one right now is what Tower of Babel and all this stuff leading up to is. Even the end of the Old Kingdom, where Abraham is migrating south down to Egypt, because that's where there was corn. But that's the ending through catastrophe of that olden age. There's a famine that hits after Abraham. We'll get into, but this is what he's talking about. These giant weather crises that come out of the east or that are planetary in nature, that come out of the north, as a whirlwind. Now, he says, applied to continued live raging elements. So hypnotized have students of society become by the ease and directness with which an evolutionary rule of thumb may be applied to all the contingencies of life. What does that mean right there? He's talking about how this evolutionary rule of thumb, he says, I'll just continue his thought because I didn't want to jump on it. He says that the raging of the elements and the crash of empires go unheeded in their graphs and handbooks. So they want history to go, so methodically, mechanically, in one evolution from monkeys and nothing to we're this superior top of the food chain now. And so he's saying they throw all of these crashing empires and the changing of world histories and migrations and catastrophes, they want to just throw it out the window kind of thing, out of their handbooks. With examples gross as earth before them, still they disdain to recognize anything as cheaply sensational as plagues and earthquakes, nor will they acknowledge the frightening speed with which these scenes of the world history had shifted. Sir Aurel Stein, in his book Lao Lan, has described the deserted houses and streets of that city standing exactly as they did 14 centuries ago, when their inhabitants were driven forth by drought so sudden and severe that neither the wood of the fruit trees nor the most delicate fabrics have rotted since then. They're almost like petrified. The mighty city of Estina, and it would make sense, famine, again, in our context, is caused by these ionic winds or plasma winds, a change in the Earth's environment that can cause like static situations, put it that way. So this was just suddenly deserted 600 years ago, blah, 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 blah. All natural life died. I'm on page 176 now. The trees of the forest threw themselves to the ground, referring to the course of the terrible winds. The storms arose, and he's talking about some catastrophe. He's just citing a catastrophe, it looks like. The mighty city of Etsina in the book by Aurel Stein he's still reading about. He says, all natural life died. The trees in the forest threw themselves to the ground, referring, of course, to the terrible winds. And storms arose which soon buried the country in sand. To this day, the trees remain undecayed, like sun-dried mummies, dead, naked, and gray. Over a vast area, once shady forest, they lay in thousands. We passed other ruins of deserted strongholds, and with strange sensations, dug up objects that no human being had touched for more than 600 years. The same traveler who reports these things was to witness the recurrence of this familiar Asiatic tragedy with his own eyes. And here now he's quoting him. He says, once we came upon the abandoned Sart village, where newly thrown up dams and uncompleted excavations bore witness to the departed population's desperate struggle to retain the vanishing water. But a day had come when there was no more water to be had. The animals stood by the watering places and sought in vain for moisture. The women wept in the houses, and the men gathered in the mosque to pray to Allah for the miracle which alone could save their many homes. But no miracle happened. The village got no water, and in the last extremity of famine, the people had thrown their most indispensable possessions on the remaining horses and donkeys, and hastily left their homes and lands of their fathers to follow their Akshakal, or village elder, the brother of Jared, you could say, out of the parched country around on a desperate search for water. So he's getting to the idea that there was a famine, a catastrophe, the normal cycles of life and rivers and flow and sources of water, excuse me, just hit my microphone, were no longer to be found. It was forcing exodus on these people, according to their records. The fate of the unhappy wanderers is thus described. Later on, we sometimes met with small parties of these former agricultural villagers, who now drifted about on the steppes as unhappy nomads. The fugitives had been obliged to divide into small groups, since no one waterhole could accommodate them all. Is not this the story of the dispersion in miniature? So he's comparing and paralleling the same historically documented event of this Sart village that he's talked about, this Estina destruction in this book by Lao Lao. I sound like I'm barking now. I'm just making up words. No, it really, for Sir Aurel Stein in his book Lao Lan, that's what it is, Lao Lan, like Li Lan, Lao Lan. So he's throwing at this professor a patterned version to say, hey, isn't this the exact pattern that you just read about in the Book of Ether that you're saying is inconceivable? And how is this possible? And he's saying like the exact same stuff just happened. Put brother of Jared and his family and everything in the shoes of these people. So he says, is not this the story of the dispersion in miniature? You know the story of how the ancestors of the Etruscans were driven out of Asia Minor. So he goes on immediately to another example. They were driven out of Asia Minor by drought and moved to the west, hunting for a promised land. It is not merely water these people are looking for, but a better land. Above all, a better grazing land. In the epic of the Bani Hilal, I don't know what that is, but obviously it's an epic, we are shown how one of the greatest of Arab tribes was driven from their homes by 7 years of hot winds, and how they sought a promised land, first in Central Asia, then in Morocco. It was when the rest of the world was smitten with famine that Egypt became the refuge of the patriarchs, right? For there was corn in Egypt. As you know, there are two classic points or centers of radiation from which all the great migrations of antiquity took their beginning: the heart of Asia and, to a far lesser degree, the Arabian desert. It is not remarkable that the migrations of the book. Is it not? Oh my gosh, guys! Is it not remarkable that the migrations of the Book of Mormon take their departure from these same two centers? Talking about the Arabian Desert and Lehi and his departure, and this Egyptian Central Asian departure by the brother of Jared in the time of Nimrod in his fake pharaoh rule through the lineage of Ham. Nibley, continuing on in 177, you must get over the idea that history moves at a slow, even majestic pace. It does not. The sudden calamity that overtook an Asian village in 1927 has struck repeatedly in the past, dispersing the inhabitants of mighty capitals to become wanderers on the earth. And when the storm laid itself to rest, the flying sands solidified again, and the terrified nomads found the whole face of nature changed into new shapes. And all the he was quoting a text there. And all the many cities and empires dispersed by a sudden puff of burning air, Babel, the city and the tower, has left behind the richest deposit of legend and tradition. He says now, bringing in Eusebius. Eusebius in the Chronicon, which has surprisingly proved one of the most reliable sources of the early Oriental history, cites the Sibyl to the effect that when all men were of one tongue, some of them built a high tower so as to mount up to heaven, but God destroyed the tower by mighty winds. 2 centuries earlier, Theophilus of Antioch gave a fuller version of the story, quoting the Sibyl in verse, after the cataclysm, cities and kings had a new beginning in this manner. The first city of all was Babylon, and one by the name of Nimrod became his king. Since at the time men tended to become scattered, they took counsel of themselves and not of the Lord, to build a city and a tower, and the top of which could reach to heaven, so that their own name might be glorified. Thus speaks the Sibyl. But when the threats of the great God were fulfilled, of which he had warned mortal men at the time that they built the tower in the Assyrian land, they all once spoke the same language and wanted to mount up to the starry heavens. But forthwith the immortal one laid great stress upon the blasts. I think this is still the Sibyl that he's quoting. So that the wind overthrew the mighty tower and drove mortals to strive with one another. And when the tower had fallen, the languages of men were divided up into many dialects, so that the earth became filled with different kingdoms of men. Now he goes on, he says, the book of Jubilees, 2nd century BC, tells how, quote, the Lord sent a mighty wind against the tower and overthrew it upon the earth. And behold, it was between Ashur and Babylon in the land of Shinar, and they called its name Overthrow. The zealous and learned Persian antiquary Thylabi, AD 1030, he just throws sources out like crazy too, like Velikovsky a bit, records the report that the people were scattered from the tower by an awful drought accompanied by winds of such velocity as actually to blow down the tower. And 40 years after the tower was finished, it says Bar Hebraeus, who collected a vast amount of lore in Central Asia in the 13th century, God sent a wind to the tower, and the tower was overturned, and Nimrod died in it. The picture of violent atmospheric disturbances accompanied by social upheavals, the scattering of tribes, and the changing of languages cannot but go back to some real experience. Not only is this is the sort of thing is it the sort of thing one would expect, but it is also definitely known to have happened time and time again. There is no reason for doubting that a great city called Babel once long ago suffered the same fate as the people of Ad and Thamad and Laulan and Estingol and the Nasamanians. So he just basically repeated all the examples that he gave in the previous things I just read. So he's like, this is a pattern. It's a thing that happens. You can't deny this. But what of the Book of Mormon? In striking contrast to the story of Lehi, where the only terrors met on the journey by the land and sea were the normal and familiar ones, including like a typhoon, we have the history of the Jaredite migration, a very freakish state of things. This is what Nibley writes, page 179. He says, the Lord commanded Nephi to build a ship, an ordinary ship, which his brothers felt he should never be able to finish. Yet the ship was finished, and the family set sail. Nephi's brethren, for all their mocking, apparently had no scornful comments to make on the type of ship he was building, from which we can conclude that it was, as he repeatedly called, simply a ship. Though, as a landsman, Nephi needed special guidance. Now, Lehi's people had to cross at least twice and probably 3 or 4 times as much water as the Jaredites, and an ordinary ship sufficed for their purposes, but Jared's ships were altogether unusual vessels. The Lord gave their builder special instructions for every detail. They had to be submersible, yet ride very lightly on the surface of the water. They were small, and they were light upon the water, yet built to stand terrific pressure, exceedingly tight like unto a dish, with special sealed vent holes that could be opened when the water pressure on the outside was greater than the air pressure within. The Lord explained why it would be necessary to build such peculiar vessels. He said, because he was about to loose winds of incredible violence that would make the crossing a frightful ordeal at best. Any windows, he warns, would be dashed to pieces. Fire will be out of the question. Ye shall be as a whale in the midst of the sea, for the mountain waves shall dash upon you. Ye cannot cross this great deep, save I shall prepare you against the waves of the sea, and the winds which have gone forth, and the floods which shall come. Therefore, what will ye do, or what will ye that I should prepare for you, that ye may have light when ye are swallowed up in the depths of the sea? And this goes back to the light question we said earlier. This was no normal crossing, and no brief passing storm. The wind did never cease. And guys, there's one page left here, so bear with me. Thank you. This is, again, selfishly for me, in the sense that I listen to these back, and I can now listen to these sections of the book of Nibley that I read that aren't available on audiobook anywhere. So if you think it's boring, that's great. You can fast forward through it to the next parts. But I think this is great. And he's going to cap this up talking about the disaster and catastrophe that pushed them across the waters to the American continent. He says, the wind did never cease to blow towards the promised land while they were upon the waters. Ether 6:8. The Lord God caused that there should be a furious wind to blow upon the face of the waters. They were many times buried in the depths of the sea because of the mountain waves which broke upon them, and also the great and terrible tempests which were caused by the fierceness of the wind. Ether 6, 5 through 6. It is perfectly clear from our account that the party was to spend a good deal of time below the surface of the sea. Of course, such phenomenal and continual winds cannot have been a mere local disturbance, and we may confidently assume that the Book of Ether is reporting the same super winds that are said to have accompanied and possibly caused the destruction of the tower. Whew. All right. If that's all you take away from this, that I read a bunch of Nibley, and he's agreeing with my point on here, that these are all the same event, the same cosmic catastrophe, that Velikovsky is pointing to Mercury and Jupiter as being the main protagonists in the sky, right? This makes a lot of sense. All right, last two paragraphs of this section. In so many words, the Book of Ether tells us that at the time of the dispersion of the world, Ether tells us that at the time of the dispersion, the world was swept by winds of colossal violence. There are three main sources for checking on this. 1, the old traditions of the tower, which almost always mention the winds. 2, the studies of the paleoclimatologists, which correlated with historical records show that the world has repeatedly passed through catastrophic climate changes within the last 6,000 years. E.c., the great world drought and windstorms of circa 22. These are the ones he already said. The terrible drought of about 1000 BC, equally violent floods of 1300 BC, and the Fimbul winter of 850 BC, etc. Actual historical records, and then he says, and 3, actual historical records of places that have suffered the same fate as Babel, showing that it was not a fantastic but actually a characteristic occurrence in world history. A good example of such historical records is Kazwini's Cosmography, which tells how in the Middle Ages, the Great Dome of Baghdad, which dome was the symbol, Alam, of Baghdad, and the crown of the country, and the principal achievement of the son of Abbas, it collapsed during a great windstorm. Scholars have often pointed out that the Tower of Babel was just such a symbol as the power of unity was just such a symbol of the power and unity of its builders. Genesis 11:4. Sorry, my mind is wanting to go faster than my mouth is working today. So, not only does the Bible not mention the winds, but the Book of Mormon itself does so casually, albeit quite specifically, by way of explaining why the Jaredite ships were built as they were in describing the sea voyage. This very casualness is a strong argument for the authenticity of the record. So there's his final punch that he hits the skeptic academic with, who reads the Book of Ether and thinks, "No, this is so fanciful." He says, "Bro, aren't you are aware of all these histories of the same type of occurrence? People building a city, wanting to build a temple, wanting to get into heaven, wanting to mimic the order of Enoch and the ascending up, right? To escape catastrophe, to seek the favor and immortality of God, right? Or the proper resurrection." And he's like, It's all over the place. All right. Thank you for bearing with me on that one. Note on the weather. Oh, he says that the casualness of how it's mentioned, right? That it's just off the cuff in the Book of Mormon that the winds are mentioned, and they're not mentioned in the Bible. Yet the mention of them in the Book of Mormon match all of the mythologies and everything that he's pulling in, all these external sources that he pulls in to make a case for his argument with this academic. He's saying, hey, guess what? The Book of Mormon casually throws this out there, so it's probably authentic. Because if they were trying to contrive it, like they would make sure to make that a main point of what they were talking about. But it's kind of casually thrown in there and inferred by all the other stuff that the Lord's making him do. So to me, again, very convincing. Again, I wouldn't include it in here if it wasn't a huge hit and awesome support that I find for this paradigm, for this cosmic perspective. Forgive me. And so that's why we read those and took the time to do it. Moving on to Abraham. Okay, I'm going to spend a little more time and space on this one. Even before Sodom and Gomorrah, there's some stories around the life of Abraham that map well into the paradigm we're acid testing. From Jewish legend and other Latter-day Sacred textual findings, there's this idea of the persecution of young Abraham by Nimrod, both at his birth, in the same pattern as the astrologers to Pharaoh in Moses' day, who warned against his birth, and that's why he slaughtered the babies, and Moses gets put in the basket, that kind of thing. Or to Herod in Jesus' day, where you have the same slaughtering of youth because the astrologers and sorcerers see signs in the sky and advent of the fall of a kingdom kind of thing. And also, as he is older and destroys false idols, Abraham, he's taken to Nimrod by his father, Terah. So let's check those stories out at a glance. Right now, these aren't you're not going to find them in the book, the Bible, or anything like that. But I want to include them because again, they fit these things so well that I just want to show that our paradigm there's place for them to be there, and you don't have to like swat them down or look at them as like odd or out of place or anything. They actually strengthen the argument. So this part here, let me get in and read this one. And these are all, I think I'm just getting them from a generic source here. What is it? Like JewishEncyclopedia.com. Forgive me. So let me read this here. His birth. I'm actually just going to read the highlighted parts, so if you want to read it all, you can. The highlighted part says here, on the night when he was born, Terah's friends among Abraham, when Abraham's born, Terah's friends, Terah is Abraham's father, among whom were counselors and soothsayers of Nimrod, were feasting in his house. And on leaving late at night, they observed a star which swallowed up 4 other stars from the 4 sides of heaven. Let me read that again. So they walk out and they see a star swallowing up 4 other stars from the 4 sides of heaven. They forthwith hastened to Nimrod and said, of a certainty a lad has been born who is destined to conquer this world and the next. Now, then give to his parents a large sum of money so as to wish for the child and then kill him. Right? Let's finish the story because it gets interesting. But Terah, who was present, said, your advice reminds me of the mule to whom a man said, I will give thee a house full of barley if thou wilt allow me to cut off thy head. Whereupon the mule replied, fool that thou art! Of what use will the barley be to me if thou cuttest off my head? Thus I say to you, if you slay the son, who will inherit the money you give to the parents? So Terah speaks up amongst these people who are plotting, basically. Then the rest of the counselors said, from thy words we perceive that the son has been born to thee, Terah. So like, oh, you had a son, didn't you, Terah? He says, yes, said Terah. A son has been born to me, but he is dead. He lies. Terah then went home and hid his son in a cave for 3 years. So he hides Abraham in a cave for 3 years. When, on coming out of the cave, Abraham saw the sun rising in all its glory in the east, he said to himself, surely this is the Lord of the universe, and him I will worship. But the evening came, and lo, the sun set at night befell him. And seeing the moon with her silver radiance, he said, this then is the Lord of the world, and all the stars are his servants. To him I will kneel. Think of the degrees of glory here being represented in the same allegory here, or story. He says, to him I will kneel. The following morning, when the moon and the stars had disappeared and the sun had risen anew, Abraham said, now I know that neither the one nor the other is the Lord of the world, but he who controls both as his servants is the creator and ruler of the whole world. Forthwith Abraham asked his father, who created the heavens and the earth? Terah, pointing to one of his idols, replied, this great image is our God. Then let me bring a sacrifice to him, said Abraham. And he ordered a cake of fine flour to be baked, and he offered it unto the idol. And when the idol did not eat it, he ordered a still finer meal offering to be prepared, and offered it to the idol. But the idol did neither eat nor answer when addressed by him. And so Abraham grew angry and said, kindling a fire, burned them all. When Terah, on coming home, found his idols burnt, he went to Abraham and said, "Who has burned my gods?" Abraham replied, "The large one quarreled with the little ones and burned them in his anger." "Fool that thou art, how canst thou say that a man who cannot see, nor hear, nor walk should have done this?" Then Abraham said, "How canst thou forsake the living God and serve gods that neither see nor hear?" So he taught his dad a lesson by burning the idols. The dad says, "Who burnt these idols?" And he's like, "Oh, the big idol, got mad at the other one and burnt him." And the dad's like, "You idiot, they didn't do that. I know it was you." And then Abraham goes, "Gotcha. How can you forsake the living God and serve gods that neither see nor hear?" So he gets him in a pickle. I like that story. Later, this one, the story continues that he goes to sacrifice him, and we'll get to that. But let's stop first at the sign in the sky. Like the birth of Christ and Herod, and like Moses and the Pharaoh, apparently the sorcerer astrologers of Nimrod interpreted the cosmic sign at his birth and sought to take his life. They did this understanding that the sign heralded the advent or birth or restoration of a true priesthood authority from God, who could threaten both the throne of kingship from Nimrod and the priestly administrative monopoly that the sorcerers had on their priestcraft. A sign, a star, planet, or the sun, a redundancy in the prophetic tradition, moving or appearing irregularly in the heavens to precede the restoration of God's covenantal promises of Zion. This archetypal pattern fits prophecy as well as our cosmic electric paradigm. So all I'm saying is that there was a sign in the heavens that preceded the advent and birth and change and bringing on and heralding of a new age and era. And that's exactly what we see portrayed here, at least symbolically in the story. Before Christ's final, and I think it's interesting too, as we'll get into, notice and remember again how the one star swallows up four other stars from the four sides of heaven. So you have some foreception going on. And we'll get into that with the tetramorph. But before Christ's final advent and restoration to his second coming, this same pattern is prophesied to manifest again on global cosmic scales, layers. See also the foreshadowing of the first advent of Christ to America in the Book of Mormon and the signs and cosmic catastrophe that accompanied that event. We'll explore this in our part 2. But I also consider the elevation of abortion in this American land and the global world at large over the last many decades in our modern era as an in-kind parallel of the mass child slaughter by wicked kings and pharaohs of the past that precedes and is enshrouded in plague and famine and cosmic catastrophe as a response from God. What am I saying there? I'm saying, woe unto our land now, for we are doing the same child slaughter that preceded catastrophes and the desolation of kingdoms in past. And this time, it's the kingdoms of the world that fall, and the kingdom of the Lord will be set up, and they will regret the day that they pretended he didn't exist. Chapter 21, the second coming of the millennium. Here's I won't even read this, but this is where we talk about all these distresses. Joseph Smith's quote talking about all these distresses that precede the second coming and the signs in the sky. And this is where he says, the sun will be turned into darkness and the moon to blood, earthquakes in diverse places, the seas heaving beyond their bounds. Then will appear one grand sign of the Son of Man in heaven. But what will the world do? They will say it is a planet, a comet, etc. But the Son of Man come as the sign of the coming of the Son of Man. But the Son of Man will come as the sign of the coming of the Son of Man, which is what they just witnessed kind of up here, right? A comet eating up four other stars from the four sides of heaven, something cosmic like this. This is exactly what Joseph Smith says precedes the second coming and the birth of the millennium. But the Son of Man will come as the sign of this coming of the Son of Man, which will be the light of the morning, which will be as the light of the morning cometh out of the east. Consider the layer of the Latter-day Church in Revelation 12, where the man-child is the very government or kingship of Christ for his millennial reign that will cast down the thrones and the kings of modern mystery Babylon. Consider also there are prophecies of the shaking of the heavens, and the signs and wonders in the persecution of the saints by the dragon are to precede the birth and the initiation of the millennial reign of Christ as King of kings and High Priest of priests. We're watching these patterns unfold clearly as the times wrap up right now. Another event is Abraham cast into the furnace. So a transfiguration event that hits ding, ding, ding for our paradigm. When he breaks the idols, Terah was a manufacturer of idols and had them for sale apparently. I'm just going to skip ahead to this one though, but there's something important here that I do want to read, at least these parts I've highlighted. So again, he talks trash about the idols. He says, "A mouth they have, but speak not. Eyes, but see not. Ears, but hear not. Hands, but handle not. May their makers be like them, and all who trust in them." And he broke them to pieces and burned them. Abraham was brought before Nimrod, who said, "Knowest thou not that I am God and ruler of the world? Why hast thou destroyed my images?" Then Abraham said, "If thou art God and ruler of the world, why dost thou not cause the sun to rise in the west and set in the east? If thou art God and ruler of the world," think of that as well, where he's talking about, why don't you switch the direction of the sun? if that, man, and I want to go into this, I don't know if I do later or not, but this is part of Jupiter. Read Velikovsky's, I think I say it at the end, Jupiter as the I don't want to say it, Janus Diurnus, like he sees both ways, because there was a time when Jupiter was witnessed to have changed rotation going from west to east to west. And it would have been like the handoff between Saturn and Jupiter to Jupiter into our normal orbit where this happens. But it's hard to talk about without building the context, so I'm not going to jump into it, other than to say this maps right onto that as well, and I didn't see that before, but there it is. If thou art God and ruler of the world, tell me that I have now, tell me all that I have now at heart, and what I shall do in the future. Nimrod was dumbfounded, and Abraham continued, Thou art the son of Cush, a mortal like him. Thou couldst not save thy father from death, nor wilt thou save thyself, nor wilt thou thyself escape it. And to me, this is Abraham like calling him out, obviously, but calling him out in his claim to be immortal, that he's claiming to be God. And this is what we were talking about, building the tower and all that, making a name in a city and a kingdom. That was known. Translation, ascension, going up and becoming immortal, like that was a thing. It's only today that we think that we're sludge and coming from monkeys. Nimrod said, worship the fire. Why not water that quenches the fire? Asked Abraham. Very well, worship the water. Why not the clouds which swallow the water? So be it, worship the clouds, Nimrod says. Then Abraham says, rather let me adore the wind which blows the clouds apart. So be it, Nimrod says, pray to the wind. But, said Abraham, man can stand up against the wind or shield himself against the walls of his house. Then adore me, says Nimrod. Thereupon Nimrod, Amraphel, see, blah, 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 or whatever, I won't say that. Then thereupon Nimrod ordered Abraham to be cast into the furnace. He had a pile of wood 5 yards in circumference set on fire, and Abraham was cast into it. But God himself went down from heaven to rescue him. Wherefore the Lord appeared to him later, saying, I am the Lord who brought thee out of the fire of the Chaldeans. Okay, we'll stop there. But and Abraham's commission then to propagate the gospel of the Lord throughout the earth. So this is kind of his calling as well. Now, this is an instance of transfiguration, if it's true, if it's real, if it is. And this is a big if, okay? Just throwing it out there because it maps on and it's out there. This is by default a fit in our electric body paradigm, because the transfiguration event, what saves him from the fire, is the presence of Christ who comes down, or the angel of the Lord who comes down to transfigure him or protect him. I'll repeat it generally again. All instances of translation, transfiguration, and resurrection are pillars of support for the electromagnetically focused cosmological lens we test. That's a big electromagnetically focused cosmological lens we test. Say that 5 times fast. Now, Abraham and Pharaoh of Egypt, delivered by catastrophe. The events I included from extra-canonical sources above assume a timeline around Abraham's birth and youth. In our Book of Abraham from the Lord through Joseph Smith, we find yet another attempt at the life of Abraham, this time by the Egyptian pharaoh's idolatrous priest. It's still a bit blurry for me here whether there were multiple attempts on Abraham's life, or if perhaps through time these collectively witness of the same event, and that's why you see them like being projected in these archetypes. That's probably more likely, but I also think of them as literal, and like maybe he did have his attempt on his life many times. Either way, these extra stories will find a supporting substrate in our cosmic paradigm. Now, let's focus on a cosmic reading of what the restoration has given us. And Joseph presented these ideas many years before some of these other sources that we're talking about already were even known or uncovered. See Nibley's writings on Abraham for more information, especially an approach to the Book of Abraham. You can read the whole PDF for free, and I think I have a link here. Yeah, you just download this, and then you can search through that or read it as you want. So that one's not something you got to buy. I know Nibley's books are a little expensive for some, but that one's a free one. We'll skim through Abraham 1 in the Pearl of Great Price. Abraham is living in Ur, and I'm just going to jump into it a little bit with the background here. Abraham is living in Ur, and his father is still worshiping the pagan planetary gods of the cursed priests of the lineage of Ham. So when he decides to seek for the patriarchal priesthood of his righteous ancestors, of Zion, right, he finds grave opposition. People around him seek to take his life, as they won't listen to him, so he needs to relocate, and he becomes a wanderer, a stranger in foreign lands. From Abraham 1, verse 1. In the land of the Chaldeans, at the residence of my fathers, I, Abraham, saw that it was needful for me to obtain another place of residence. Jumping to verse 5. My fathers, having turned from their righteousness, and from the holy commandment which the Lord God had given unto them, unto the worshipping of the gods of the heathen, utterly refused to hearken to my voice. For their hearts were set to do evil, and were wholly turned to the God of Elkanah, and the God of Libnah, and the God of Mamacrah, and the God of Korash, and the God of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Therefore, they turned their hearts to the sacrifice of the heathen in offering up their children unto these dumb idols, and hearkened not unto my voice, but endeavored to take my life away by the hand of the priest of Elkanah. The priest of Elkanah was also the priest of Pharaoh. Now at this time it was the custom of the priests of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to offer upon the altar which was built upon the land of Chaldea for the offering unto these strange gods, men, women, and children. And it came to pass that the priest made an offering unto the god of Pharaoh, and also unto the god of Shagreel, even after the manner of the Egyptians. Now the god of Shagreel was the sun. So here they are making planetary, solar, human sacrifice in Chaldea. So I have a question that we'll answer, like why is the priest of Pharaoh up in Ur of Chaldea if that's up in Mesopotamia? But we'll look at that. That was like one of my initial questions I remember always reading, but there's a reason. Continuing on in verse 10. Oh, so this is just recapping that his fathers tried to kill him, wanted to kill him, and that there's real human sacrifice going on, and they're worshiping planets and idols, the sun, stars, and moon. Even Abraham 1:10. Even the thank offering of a child did the priests of Pharaoh offer upon the altar, which stood by the hill called Potiphar's Hill, at the head of the plain of Olishem. Now, this priest had offered upon this altar 3 virgins at one time, who were the daughters of Onitah, one of the royal descent directly from the loins of Ham. These virgins were offered up because of their virtue. They would not bow down to worship gods of wood or of stone. Therefore, they were killed upon this altar, and it was done after the manner of the Egyptians. I'll just side note here, a lot of Nibley's work, especially in an approach to the book of Abraham, the Egyptologists and everybody that came out against Facsimile 1 and Joseph Smith's explanations for it, they just wanted to run with the idea that only that scene, only that stuff was depicting mummification, that it wasn't human sacrifice, that wasn't happening at the time. And Nibley was a staunch, he took offense to that claim and laid it flatly that there were many different reasons and things that the throne that's depicted in, like the lion throne that's depicted in Facsimile 1, as we'll explore, is used in these rituals. Everything was done there, from birth to death to rebirth to mummification to resurrection rituals. It was essentially the archetypal altar or pillar of heaven. Okay. Elder John A. Whitsoe, 1872 to 1952, a quorum of the 12 apostles, he wrote, "The family of Abraham had turned from righteousness and become idolaters. Abraham, therefore, himself a follower of God's truth, preached righteousness to them, but without avail. For his insistence upon the worship of the only true and living God, he was persecuted and his life sought. So intense was the hatred of the idolaters that it was only by the intervention of the Lord that he was saved from being offered up as a sacrifice to the idols of the people." That's from Evidences and Reconciliations, his book. Here's a couple interesting tidbits regarding Egyptian human sacrifice mentioned in Joseph's Book of Abraham. President Joseph Fielding Smith commented on the human sacrifice that took place during the time of Abraham. He wrote, "Abraham was of the 10th generation from Noah." Remember, we talked about Adam. "Several hundred years had passed since the flood, and people had multiplied and spread over the face of the earth. The civilizations of Egypt, Chaldea, Assyria, and the petty nations of Canaan had been established. In the midst of this scattering, the true worship of the Father was nearly lost. Sacrifice instituted in the days of Adam and continued in the practice and teaching of Noah, in the similitude of the great sacrifice of the Son of Man, had become perverted. Instead of offering clean animals, such as the lamb and bullock, the apostate nations had dwindled in unbelief to the extent that human sacrifice was offered to their idol gods." So we have, again, another witness from modern prophets of this idea of diffusion, that the sacrifice was degenerate, that it all came from one original source, being Adam, and then Noah after the flood, the next Adam. And then it would be Abraham who explains the proper use of things and not worship of the stars, but worship of God to these pagan nations with power as a witness again. So here's another from Carrie Mulholstein, professor of ancient scripture at BYU. So again, normie take, but can help support for us. It says, Joseph Smith tells us that Facsimile 1 in the Book of Abraham depicts the priests of Egypt attempting to sacrifice Abraham. For some, a problem has arisen because Egyptologists long taught that the Egyptians did not engage in human sacrifice. As a graduate student in Egyptology, I believed all the academic publications that said this, and I confidently taught it. Then I learned of some archaeological remains in an Egyptian fort that seemed to be an example of human sacrifice in ancient Egypt. As I studied more, not only did I become convinced that it was human sacrifice, but I became so fascinated that I devoted years to studying it. During my research, I came to realize that the Egyptians often did engage in human sacrifice. As a result of my studies and those of others, the practice of human sacrifice in ancient Egypt is now generally accepted by my colleagues in Egyptology. As I continued examining this phenomenon, I learned that the situation described in Abraham chapter 1 is exactly the kind of situation in which we would expect human sacrifice to occur, based on the Egyptian evidence. That is, those attempting to stop the practices of the Egyptian cultic system were sacrificed. It became clear to me that the very thing that had bothered some people about the story of Abraham's near sacrifice was actually a point that supports the authenticity of that story. All we had to do was look at it more closely. I like that little snapshot from Brother Mohlstein because, in essence, that's a fractal of what I'm talking about in a lot of different things. That what other people think is a sore spot, like weird anecdotal quotes that don't seem to fit into the picture or the narrative, the cultural norm where we wouldn't, where we can be accepted by society. All those things that were kind of shunned or looked down upon as marks or manches against Joseph Smith actually turn out to be brilliant pillars of support that connect not only our understanding of what Joseph Smith and these people taught to the scriptures, but to all the other ancient cultures and histories who are diffusions of the same understanding or the proper understanding of them. Let's set up this little geography, as I mentioned before. Why is the priest of Pharaoh in the kingdom of Egypt in Ur of Mesopotamia? So here's a Bible map. Here's where Ur is supposed to be, or it's up here in the northern country. And here's where it says that. It says Ur, first residence of Abraham near the mouth of the Euphrates, where he was almost a victim of human sacrifice, saw the angel of Jehovah and received the Urim and Thummim. Note also a possible alternate site for Ur in northern Mesopotamia. So again, here's this and here's Egypt. It's like, what the? Here's an estimated map also, though, of Egypt, ancient Egypt, and note how it doesn't quite reach up into the possible locations of where Ur was, but it does go up into these inland here. This is the Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. Just pointing out, okay, this is what it looks like. It's still kind of a guessing game even for them the further back you go into these ancient histories about like who actually owned what or where. But let's look to our Institute Guide and see what else we can find that talks about this. The Pearl of Great Price Institute Manual provides a compelling answer, though. I also consider how both Nimrod and the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, or of Egypt, are descendants of Ham. So having sympathetic false priesthoods makes sense anyways. Here's what it says. Abraham 1:1. The Chaldeans and the Egyptians. Ur, the birthplace of Abraham, is generally identified with the modern town of Muger in present-day Iraq. It is about 150 miles from the Persian Gulf and 875 miles from Egypt. Although the peoples of Chaldea and Egypt were separated geographically, it appears that in the days of Abraham, they shared religious beliefs and practices. Elder Marky Peterson of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles explained that Abraham mentions that the priest of Elkanah was also the priest of Pharaoh. The altar was obviously specially built for human sacrifice. How did this Egyptian infusion reach into Mesopotamia? What was the priest of Pharaoh doing in Ur? At this time, Egyptian influence was felt throughout the Fertile Crescent, a geographic region that extends in the curve from Egypt north into Mesopotamia. That's what we're... then east and south again towards the Persian Gulf. Much of the advanced learning of the people of the Nile was exported abroad, including some of their religious customs. That's from his book, Abraham, Friend of God. Nibley allows for even more wiggle room. He says that it was likely all part of the Egyptian kingdom at the time. He has a few other cool points that add into what I'm saying to express in this section. Like he has a throwaway comment here that we'll listen to about Alexander the Great as the son of Zeus, Ammon. Okay, keep that in mind when we're talking about Jupiter and Saturn and these types of things. To conquer it back when Alexander the Great takes over the area. This whole theme of false kings and kingdoms is consistent regarding our Babylon versus Zion binary at play. And Abraham is the Adam or Noah or Osiris of our current heaven and earth into what I'm trying to express here in this section. So let's listen to Nibley here. I snipped this out. It's like 4 minutes of this speech here.
Given by Dr. Hugh Nibley.
Yeah, so I jumped to 27:19, I believe.
Today's lecture is entitled Abraham.
And of Chaldea, the offerings unto these strange
36:57.
gods, men, women, and children. Well, what was the Egyptian king doing in Chaldea? Well, as you know, in the 18th dynasty, as you know, Ramses II. What was he doing up there at Megiddo and so forth? We conquered that. Egypt, that was the Egyptian country in those days. That's where this was, Chaldea. And it was a temporary time. At the time Abraham wrote this, or at the time his children were supposed to read it, apparently it was no longer Egyptian empire. It came and went, depending. You see, in the 18th dynasty, Thothmes III took the whole shebang clear over to the Euphrates and so forth, and they lost it all, and then they got it back again, the 20th dynasty. Then finally, in the 22nd dynasty, the great Shishonk went out and conquered it all again, claimed to have conquered it, and even more, and so forth. And then it was lost again, and then Alexander the Great took the name of Shishonk and said he was the son of Ammon, made himself pharaoh, and went back and conquered the whole thing again, following the very same pattern. These men, each one of these conquerors, called himself a cosmocrator. The story of the cosmocrator is important because Abraham's rival Pharaoh always calls himself the cosmocrator. You know what that would be.
Creator of the universe.
The world, the universe, and a krator is a person who rules. The cosmocrator. It's a Greek title, but this is the Latin form. The cosmocrator was the man who claimed to rule the world as God's successor on earth. And the mortal rival of Abraham was a cosmocrator who went by the name of Nimrod. And all the legends say that the Pharaoh who tried to sacrifice Abraham was this Nimrod. And you know, the Nimrod, the mighty hunter of the Bible, isn't the same one. That's a long story, we won't go into it. But the point is that Abraham, in the legends, has this rivalry with with the person who claims to have the priesthood and the kingship. Does he have the right to rule, and does he have the priestly right? Well, that's what Abraham had, and that's what Pharaoh coveted. And you notice when he tries to sacrifice Abraham, now this is the story that is told in the Midrash here, that Abraham was put on the altar, and and the fire was ready. See, you first cut the throat of the victim and then cast him on the fire. It was always done that way. The two of them, the fire was ready. You notice Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. Isaac was carrying the wood for the fire. But Abraham raised the knife. It was a sacrificial knife, and then the fire follows. Well, as the priest raised the knife, a great mighty earthquake struck. It overthrew the altar. It killed the priest, and Abraham wasn't touched. Well, of course, this impressed the king, who immediately let him go. And he didn't have to sacrifice Abraham anymore, because the sacrifice had already been made. The high priest was the substitute. After all, if one had been sacrificed, so he had no argument with Abraham, and he did honor Abraham by letting him sit on his throne. And we're told that when they built this, they took the wood, as they had brought first the Pharaoh had ordered the people all to bring wood, cedar wood, and bring an enormous bonfire to burn Abraham on. And then the priest's knife is cast from his hand, the priest is overthrown, he's killed, and Abraham is let go. And then, he said, he orders them to gather wood and build a special throne to put Abraham's throne on. And then he said he had all the children, 365 highest nobles of the land, come with their children to Abraham to sit on the throne and be taught the principles of astronomy.
365. Just think about that.
By Abraham.
Cycle.
Well, that's what we have
circle,
here,
year.
We say
circumambulating, like surrounding a circle.
Figure 1. Abraham sitting upon Pharaoh's throne by the politeness of the king with the crown on his head, representing the priesthood. That is the priestly crown. Notice the two feathers. That is the spiritual crown, the shoe feathers. And emblematical of the grand presidency in heaven with a scepter of justice and judgment. And then it says, Abraham is reasoning upon the principles of astronomy in the king's court. And we're told that that's exactly what he did. We're told in the Midrash Rabbah that after it's in the Beit HaMidrash. I have the Beit HaMidrash text, page 140, as a matter of fact, in the 5th volume, that he sat upon the throne by Abraham's permission, and all the court brought their children to be instructed in the principles of astronomy. We're told he began his preaching, "Blessed be God who created the sun, the moon, and the planets," and that's the way he began his sermon to the children of the Egyptians after Pharaoh had accepted Abraham. Of course, he accepted Abraham at court and becomes a great favorite with him. Then you have the story of Sarah and the like. He took Sarah to...
All right, so I think I stop it there. I'm getting ahead of ourselves with the story of Sarah, but yeah, that's a great opportunity to look into Hugh Nibley, basically saying a lot of the same stuff that I'm stumbling through here a bit. Anyways, Nimrod the Cosmocrator. So, now back to the story with all this fresh in mind. In Abraham 1, verse 12, Abraham says, "And it came to pass that the priests laid violence upon me, that they might slay me also, as they did those virgins upon the altar. And that you may have a knowledge of this altar, I will refer you to the representation at the commencement of this record." What? So all of a sudden he's like, "Yeah, I'm telling you this crazy story, and then I'm going to show you about this altar. I want to tell you all about this altar. It was made after the form of a bedstead, which was had among the Chaldeans, and it stood before the gods of Elkanah, Libnah, Mamukra, Gorash, and also a god like unto that of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. That you may have an understanding of these gods, I have given you the fashion of them in the figures at the beginning, which manner of figures is called by the Chaldeans Araulinos, which signifies hieroglyphics." And now here is that facsimile 1, and you've got Abraham on the altar. It's a lion altar. You've got these 4 jars, these figures. You've got some space water here. You've got a crocodile in it, and then you've got these pillars, these doors, these gates. You've got a guy in a black suit, white face, nice cool shawl and an apron and cool outfit and a sacrificial knife about to cut into Abraham. Then you have the Spirit of the Lord coming down to save and intervene. And then you have this other symbol down here, which is just signified as like Abraham in Egypt everywhere you see it. Okay, so I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to show you how this is our polar configuration, and that this ritual sacrifice is the sacrifice of Christ essentially on that wheel, on the cross. But it's going to take some building to do that. But we're going to do it. Okay, so here it is. And you have the idolatrous gods that he mentioned here, and Pharaoh. So you have 4 of them here, and 1 representing man, Pharaoh, in down below. So Abraham not only takes time to describe what the altar and ritual looked like, but he drew a depiction with obvious symbolic depth. To me, this signals that it was important. This image was designed to symbolize more than just a terrestrial scene of attempted ritual murder. When we gauge facsimile 1 according to our restored cosmic paradigm, we can map the altar and the human sacrifice that is depicted there as a symbolic stack of the same sacred cosmic throne, planetary configuration of sacrifice and redemption that fell apart at the flood. And that will return, at the millennium to consume the current and initiate the new heaven and the new earth. So to consume the current new heaven and earth, to initiate the new heaven and earth. I could have written that better. And then answers begin to fall in place when you start to look at it with this perspective. This was the ritual death and resurrection of the king. And Nibley talks a lot about this as the Sed festival. And I'm perceive that there is some dispute among his teaching on that and his like emphasis on that and modern Egyptian LDS scholars and stuff like that. So I don't know enough to speak so freely on it, but there is a festival where you do this ritual death of the king, where he is essentially resurrected like Osiris, and that he's, Nibley argues that this is what Abrahamic sacrifice was kind of in place of or represented, but all right, just to add that on there, that this is what it was. It was the ritual death and resurrection of the king, of Osiris. And Osiris in himself, through the Saturn myth and everything else we've been studying, the Thunderbolts, all of that, we know it as a Saturnian parallel, as we've explored with the Thunderbolts and Velikovsky. So naturally, it would need to take place, the ritual, after the same symbolic manner. And here you have Osiris. He's the god of life, the god of death, the god of rebirth, the god of agriculture, of seeds, of waters, of everything. A lot of stuff that match right onto Saturn and the initial polar column or tree of life or throne. And this is why I put this here, cosmic throne tether, right here. That everything we've talked about, my Article 9 on the symbol on the conference center roof to the new symbol of the church, and throne doctrine in itself being a physical manifestation of the Mount of Transfiguration, of how the earth in a millennial transfigured state will appear. That's what throne doctrine represents, that this is the seat of the throne of God that will ultimately, that Christ inherits and it becomes celestial, a celestial throne. So this altar of sacrifice and associated rituals, like nearly all of our temple rituals, are symbolically depicted in a cosmic throne scenery, or in cosmic throne scenery, in correspondence, and when I say correspondence, I mean as above, so below, as in heaven, so on earth, to the ancient priesthood kingship archetypes that Pharaoh so desperately sought to imitate. The altar is the cross, or the intersection of kingdoms. It's the gathering point at which also the throne and seat of treasure, like X marks the spot, around which all things circumambulate, or circle, or rotate. All things move around this center tree. We've been ad nauseum talking about this with the polar column and rotating around, right? Birth, creation, government, sacrifice, and even the resurrection of Osiris all occur at the seat of power, the vesica of the cosmos, the meeting of heaven and earth, right? The temple itself is this same archetype. We've explored this in the Circle and the Square essay, and I linked to that. But it warrants a reminder as how it directly correlates in this context. Here again from Hugh Nibley's article titled The Circle and the Square in Temple and the Cosmos. And I have it snipped in from there. It says, 2 recent studies discuss the cosmic nature of the wheel, the dome-shaped shrine, or royal balde. Remember, 2 dome-shaped, we're talking about the Kaaba, we're talking about the all domes, all mountains, all mounds, the king of the mountain, these temples that were built, right, to imitate the world mountain, the initial world mountain. It says, as paradoxical as it may seem, such a symbol of supreme stability as the throne, temple, holy city, and even sacred mountain. World mountains are often depicted as revolving wheels or as mounted on wheels. That's a strange thing, Nibley says. The Roman quadrata represents the 4 corners of the earth and the center of everything. The Romans always drew it this way, and it's just a circle with a cross in it. But it's also the picture of a wheel. The Babylonians combined the 2 very neatly in their cosmic design. It's the wheel that goes round and round but never moves. For the nomads, it's the Kaaba, a dome. The Latin word is cupola, a cap, a cup. It represents the dome of the heavens, and you find it everywhere as the common shape of churches, and the square church accompanies it. The dome, like a stupa in India, is mounted over a perfect cube. To the nomads, the kube, or domed red leather tent of the chief, is the Kaaba. And again, I went over this in depth in the Circle and the Square essay when we're talking about circle and square and cube and a dome. All of this being emblematic and symbolic and a witness to the polar configuration in this cosmic perspective too. And here we just I'm just reinforcing it because we'll get over we'll talk about the cube portion of it in the altar of sacrifice down below. Keep that in mind. The Islamic qibla derives from a root meaning to face, to receive, to look toward. When a Muslim prays 5 times a day, what direction does he face? To Mecca, the center of the world. How does he know where the center is? Well, in his house, he has a qibla. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. A marker that tells the direction he must face, by which the tribe, when it camps, takes a bearing in space. The qibla itself is oriented with reference to the heavenly bodies. For the Asiatics, as well as the Romans, the royal tent is a templum or tabernaculum. It's the same thing as the outer court or the Greek temple, the temenos, which means temple, to cut. It's the point at which the 2 lines, the cardo and the decumenos, intersect, the axis mundi. All space comes together at this absolute theoretical perfect point. It is the center of everything, which doesn't exist. It's like the singularity that physicists talk about today. Things that are real and conceivable but not describable. Thus, it's a device for taking our bearings on wherever we are. Think about what he's saying. The center that they were describing and talk about and was, like, it doesn't exist today. We don't see it. Well, we know from our paradigm, looking at this and reading what he's saying, as it was dissolved. It was dissolved, and we're in a different heavens and a different earth. But it will be restored when heavens rolled together like a scroll. And we round about the throne. Okay. What does he say? Oh, he says, so now it's like a metaphorical thing where we find our bearing for wherever we are, kind of thing. It's relative in that regard. But the singularity, I like that idea. That's in terms of the temple. That's precisely what a temple does. It puts us into the picture of time and space. It's a sort of sacred observatory, like the tabernacle or the camp of Israel, and at the same time, a kind of planetarium, a model of the cosmos. Oh, yes, indeed. And here are a bunch of sun wheels I included down here below that show the same circle and square shape in the center. Again, think of the conference center rooftop symbol. The cutting of the sacrifice at the center of the temple throne is the ultimate singularity of ritual. This is why we make covenants on and before altars and witnesses that mimic this same environment. I'm going to do a separate article in the future on the Vesica, on the parting of covenants and this idea of cutting a covenant. It's deep, vast, rich, and beautiful, and it will enhance your temple experience too, and your understanding of covenants. And it reinforces this. Like, I could insert it right here. I want to almost, but I didn't. Now, the sacrifice is supposed to be in similitude of Christ, the Lamb of atonement and restitution, as Adam on down to Noah surely knew. And here you have similarities. I stole this from somebody who was like, these people are always trying to say, oh, the Christians just stole it from ancient stuff. I'm just using it to show how it's the same thing. They're essentially, I beat this dead horse too much. You guys know. So here's the resurrection of the sun. This pillar, the Djed pillar, the spine pillar, the plasma instability with toruses sticking out here. got these two sides as Isis and Nephthys, I think with two forming a throne and something else. 6 guys worshiping up here and the cross. All right, so visually you get it. Let me present images side by side that depict the same collective altar of sacrifice. Then I'll explain how I see a Saturnian throne of God imagery in all of Abraham's facsimiles and in Joseph's explanations of them. So here's the image of hodgepodge. To someone who isn't following along, this would seem like a bunch, like a random collection of images. Like, oh, that's cute, that's cool. But what I'm saying is that they are all depicting the same thing. This is all symbolic of the same idea, of the same paradise lost, the same center place, the same temple. I'm going to work my way from bottom to top of facsimile 1 and explain how each figure translates to a Saturnian paradigm. In doing so, we'll see how the above images are connected and reflecting the same covenantal idea and sacrificial echo of paradise lost, the fall, and redemption. Let's put that in there. Fall and redemption. Figure 11, going down to the bottom. It says, and the pillars of heaven make, this figure 11 and the pillars of heaven that it's described as make logical sense in an electric universe paradigm or an electric paradigm. Consider the light pillars or structures that we witness today near aurora latitudes where the atmosphere is charged by the Birkeland current from the sun at the poles. We'll read this here. But these right here, these pillars are detected below the Rao Ki Yang, which is identified as the expanse or the firmament. So these pillars of heaven are below whatever the atmosphere, the heaven that separates space from us. So to me, that means within our immediate waters or our immediate atmosphere are these pillars manifest. A light pillar is an atmospheric optical phenomenon in which a vertical beam of light appears to extend above and or below a light source. The effect is created by the reflection of light from tiny ice crystals that are suspended in the atmosphere or that comprise high-altitude clouds, cirrostratus or cirrus clouds. If the light comes from the sun, usually when it's near or even below the horizon, the phenomenon is called a sun pillar or solar pillar. Light pillars can also be caused by the moon or terrestrial sources, such as streetlights and erupting volcanoes, as well as the aurora. So Nibley also counts them as 12, these 12 here. And as in the 12 gates of the temple and of Jerusalem, think of the 12 divisions of the solar journey, each month 12, right? The sun travels 30 degrees along the ecliptic. I suspect that this is the case since the tabernacle and the temple are mirrors of what was witnessed above. The difference to keep in mind here is that while these gates are presented horizontally or linearly, right here, they could also correctly be placed in a cross of 4 quarters or 3 gates, like the 4 quarters of 3 gates, like the 4 arms of the compass and how Israel was camped around the tabernacle right up here. So these gates could be presented in a cross or flat out like this underneath where they're supposed to be. That's in effect correct, according to the Saturnian stuff. And then I included a bunch of pillars of heaven. These are actual light pillars, and they're beautiful. Look them up. And then also the organ of the tabernacle with these same type of columns, pillars of heaven. It's possible that these light pillars, or perhaps a similar plasma phenomenon, were a more regular feature in ancient skies and seen in other places when the configuration of planets by their movements and realignments, think also Passovers, overcharged our atmosphere. The assumption for me is that this type of display will return in obvious form and increased frequency as millennial paradise is restored to the Earth. We'll experience auroras and light pillars and other atmospheric signs at irregular latitudes as the Earth's electric dialogue with other bodies is increased during the great day of the Lord's wrath, or the apocalypse, and the lead up to it. Pharaoh, in general, is a copy or a proxy of Osiris, Adam, King, Christ, the high priest, the father figure. The Pharaoh is imitating the ruler of the heavens, right? We just heard Nibley say. The corrupt kings of spacious building alternate paths always attempt to take the glory and titles and names and authorities of what they are forbidden or unauthorized to have. Satanic. Like Nibley made mention, the Pharaoh is the self-proclaimed cosmocrator. I like this too in the definition that it's an epithet for God or Satan. Well, master of the universe, master Mahan, master of this world, right? The God of this world, as he claims. And he's to be unseated when Christ comes. Moving on to the crocodile and the firmament here, 9 and 12. Represented as the idolatrous god of Pharaoh, the crocodile. What? In facsimile 1, figure 9, the idolatrous god of Pharaoh is depicted as the serpent or crocodile of heaven because he's clearly chilling there with the expanse. That's why he's in heaven, right? In context of the apostate idolatrous planetary worship of antiquity, And considering the Saturn myth and Osiris and the serpent Ouroboros of creation, this symbolic assignment is appropriate. Again, a win. Our theory can see this and interpret it correctly as a strength and to Joseph Smith's credit. Sobek is a crocodile deity in ancient Egyptian mythology. He was considered to be an aspect of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, resurrection, agriculture, and fertility. Sobek was also associated with the life-giving waters of the Nile, which provides fertility and creation to the land in its annual cycles. Remember now, just project yourself cosmically all of a sudden. And what did Osiris, if we're calling Osiris Kolob, and if we're calling Kolob not just the planet Saturn, but the configuration of planets, the whole family, that's Kolob, right? That's Osiris. That's the life-giving waters to the earth and Eden when it was in its good state, okay, when it was in its perfect state. That's the idea of that I'm seeing projected here onto the earth, into these different cities with these rivers, or like the River Jordan in Jerusalem, like the Nile here in Egypt, like you could see the Mississippi River even in America, as my friend AJ pointed out to me yesterday. Props to you, AJ. And this is the same as above, so below idea, where you have these waters in the north of the polar column that were released to the earth and that will be gathered up again. This same type of parallel and imagery matches. It maps onto each other. So this is what the crocodile, though, jumping back into crocodile talk, Sobek, talking about the life-giving waters of the Nile and how the crocodile is a symbol of it. He's within those waters, right? And he offers protection in there, as well as, let's see, the relationship between Sobek and Osiris is complex and varies across different texts and beliefs, and also time, like eras, time periods of Egyptian history. But it's not disputed, it's not a question, that Sobek was a figure adopted by the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom during the time of Abraham. So this is very real. Like that's assignation by Joseph Smith, either a lucky guess, right, or he's a prophet. All right. In plainness, the Egyptian pharaoh assumes the role of the cosmic center stem or stream, the pole position, like the Atom Man, the Atlas holding up the universe, right? Like Christ as the cornerstone of Zion, when he's the Son of Man standing upon the earth, right? Which is the resting place of the Alpha and the Omega. He becomes the heaven man, divine, and his body is also reverenced as the very enclosure or structure of his kingdom. I want to repeat that again. His body is also the enclosure or structure of his kingdom. Think of the parallels with regards to how we speak of the body of Christ as members of the church, or a house, or a temple. Stack onto this how we speak of the heavenly temple throne being a collection of planetary bodies in a polar grouping or alignment with the earth as the footstool. The cosmic throne is a planetary megazord in harmony. If you don't know what a megazord is, it's from Power Rangers. I forgive you. Dino Megazord here. I wanted to include these because it's too much, right? It's a combination of 5 dinosaurs, so different dinosaurs, they in their own form, controlled by their own Power Ranger, they can combine and they all work together in harmony as one heart, one mind, right? To defeat these larger behemoths and dragons and things that come in and threaten the earth. So here you have the combination of them. Now, and check out the plasma sword and the laser eye beams that this being produces, right? You can't, like, people know. Fits the archetype. Cranial laser. Back to the facsimile. Check out this graphic I made to highlight how figure 9 represents the plasma pillar and the middle section between heaven and earth. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about, you're familiar with this one right here. I'm circling the Saturn, Mars, Venus polar configuration. This stream, this pole, this connection, this mediation is the man, is the heaven man. It's the angel. It's the holding up the world. All these figurines right here. That's why I included these. The pillar god holding up heaven and earth. Well, what does a crocodile look like when you lay him out in the river, right? Or when you see him in the river or basking? It's exactly like the squatting man, okay? And it's scaled just like the crystal man of Adam, you know what I mean? The reptilians and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's too perfect to depict a heavenly man, a translated man, a heaven man. So number 9. Here we have, I also included the definition of number 12, the firmament or Raki Yang, signifying the expanse over our heads. In this case, in relation to this subject, the Egyptian, what does it say? The Egyptian meant to signify Shauma. I can't read it. It's too blurry for me right now. The high heavens answering to the Hebrew word Shaumayin. I can't remember. Okay. So Pharaoh feigned priesthood authority to mediate between heavens and the earth as divinity incarnate. So you see how Jesus is depicted behind this same sun wheel, behind the same 4 streams, the 4 quarters of the earth and heaven, as above, so below, that type of thing. That's exactly what the pharaohs are depicting and trying to do in all of this symbolism so far. Okay. I wanted to include this from, wait. This is I'm not going to include that one. I had a whole nother topic to go off on that one, because the Rao Ki Yang is also figure 4 in facsimile 2. And so here's the expanded definition of the expanse there, but it's not really that important right now for where I want to go. This is a clip from the Saturn myth, and it says here, often the Egyptians represented the 4 streams by 4 vases or 4 crocodiles. The crocodile is an Egyptian symbol for flowing water. The Egyptian book of the Dead. The 4 crocodiles live by the words of power. Interesting. That is, they come to life through or as the outward flowing speech of the Creator. On attaining the heavenly kingdom, the deceased king beseeches the crocodiles, the rivers. Let not thy fiery water be inflicted upon me. As figures of the 4 life-bearing streams, the crocodiles were identified with the 4 quarters of the cosmos. That's this planetary 4-pillared streamer that we see on the conference center roof, that we see here depicted by the Thunderbolts project as the 4 streamers from Venus in one of the morphologies of the plasma, as the 4 rivers of Eden kind of thing. So in a Saturnian reconstruction, the pharaoh's face would represent Mars in the center. And guess what? Sometimes they would paint the face of the pharaoh red, right? And the crown would be Venus and her brilliant discharges. In Aztec and Mayan tradition as well, this is the same, where you have the red face and then they wear the crown of Venus as their crown. And they even called it like it was the star of Venus that they would wear on their head and around their loins for protection. Because of the morphology of the planetary configuration, the crown and the face of the heavenly god was revered as different shapes and forms or combinations of the planets: Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and perhaps others, as they were removed from their prior positions and stretched out over the empty place, when the Lord hangeth the earth upon nothing. And what am I keep referring there over and over and over again? It's Job 26. And the more you start to understand this perspective, this paradigm, this scripture is going to come to life more and more. So he says, dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. He bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them. He holdeth back the face of his throne, and spreadeth his cloud upon it. He hath compassed, think of compass, like circling the 4 quarters, the waters with bounds, waters, rivers, until the day and night come to an end. The pillars of heaven, hey, that's part in our facsimile and what we're talking about, tremble and are astonished at his reproof. Yeah, well, they were astonished and trembled, and they were scattered. They fell, like Samson, right? He divideth the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smiteth through the proud. Dividing, right? We talked about this. Dividing of them. By his spirit he hath garnished the heavens, and which is decorated, right? Decorated the cosmos. His hand hath formed the crooked serpent. Lo, these are parts of his ways, but how little a portion is heard of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? Now just note, waters, north, bind, clouds, covering, throne, compass, pillars of heaven, dividing the sea, garnish the heavens, crooked serpent, thunder. Are you seeing the themes? Here's a picture from the Thunderbolts project with Mars red. This column is plasma, and it could have looked at different times, but obviously it could have taken the same shape here that they describe in these. They're called kink instabilities, or I think these would be like, these might be a kink instability in it, where you have these little bulges of plasma, because it's reacting to the waves. Anyways, so this is what they're showing in the crown. That it would be the same type of idea. And here's a Persian version of it as well, which I've seen kind of off axis or from a different angle. Okay, yeah, and here it shows different positions of the planet would be ascribed to different aspects of the god, right? So here's the god in his eye. We have the pupil of the eye, the apple of the eye, right here. You have the bull, with this being the head of the bull and these being the horns. And you have a planet above it, right? So you'd have the monkeys holding up their hands and then the planet or a ring above it, kind of thing, that idea. Or you have the crown, where you see them attached and Mars looking like it's wearing Venus, or sitting in its lap as the throne. That's why Venus is also, or Isis is the throne god, where the pharaoh actually just sits into the god. All of these things match up. And here are some more red-faced pharaohs to talk about that, and just the plasma morphology, the crooked serpent on the forehead. the cosmic symbolism dripping from it. And even the beard or goatee, the tassels that come down, the cords, the ropes, the ribbons that hang down from the face or the head or the shoulders as a reciprocal plasma column or waters or clouds that would come down to connect with and water the earth. Here's a depiction of all these symbols and signs kind of going through the motion of Mars coming up and down the polar column here and the different shapes that it would make. And then on the side here, he's put the different symbols or names that they can be depicted or that look like it in depiction. So you have Saturn, Venus, and Mars. And plasma is what's extending down. This is the ox head, the tongue coming out of the mouth of the god, the sword dividing the iron rod, the pillar of fire, Jacob's ladder. It's the axis mundi. It's the tree of life. Here's the heaven man with it stretched out. Angel. The Lamb of God, the Son of Man. The mountain of the Lord. Alpha and the Omega. The Trinity. 1, 2, 3. And just stop here because these are the archetypes. You have Saturn as the creator, the father. You have Venus as the goddess, the mother. And the original Trinity, there are even, look at lots of stuff about this. The original Trinity had a female aspect to it, yes. Though, no, the Holy Ghost is not a woman. It is not the mother. That is blasphemy. Don't even entertain it. But this idea of three is powerful, and so it doesn't have to just apply to these archetypes. But these pop up in the planetary archetypes a lot. You can even talk about like Adam and Eve right here. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after, like that kind of idea. Jack the beanstalk going up to the land of the giants. All these fables and histories and stuff can map onto the same Saturnian creation and not just the scriptures. That's, to me, again, the signs of good fruit, good seed. Let's watch the rest of this animation. Mars is the warrior, the child. Mars is also the rock cut from the mountain, it can be. This was the mountain, it comes down. The condescension of God. All right. So Moses' staff, and credit to Ryan Darger, who did the animation, a good friend. Moses' staff, like Pharaoh's, and Mark Pinnell. The subtitles there. Good job. Okay, Moses' staff is like Pharaoh's, right? His trunch. What do you call it? Staff. I can't. There's an actual Egyptian name for it. Hold up. Moses' staff, like Pharaoh's, also represents the same pillar of mediation and judgment, like the plumb line, the iron rod. And what it did, and what did it turn into before Pharaoh and the magicians in Moses' episode? It was a serpent, right? Which in the end ate up the other serpents of the false priests. Do you remember Abraham and the comet that ate up the other stars from the four quarters, right? Interesting parallels in these ideas, and you'll see it again in prophecy with dragon motifs and things like this. Okay, remember also the fiery seraphs in the desert and Moses' brazen serpent that cured their illness? Well, it's all connected. So remember now, also Satan's appearance in the paradise of Eden with their four streams and rivers as the serpent, and this same creative form and cosmic figure of mediation and regeneration. So again, Satan appearing in that same form. Here's a cool it's just an older depiction of the Garden of Eden. It says here a map of the Garden of Eden before God destroyed the earth with the flood. And here they have it looking like four-quartered, circled city with rivers and the tree in the middle, kind of like how we've been talking about, and the altar of sacrifice down here at the bottom. We could flip this upside down, and it's the tabernacle. It's the temple. It's the same archetype that we build our temples in, and I'm going to show you that. Here it is. Note how the garden is depicted with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge being in the center, or in the midst, literally in the middle, with the rivers flowing water out, quartering the garden, and then they also enclose or encircle it. For more on this concept, read this article here. And here's from Pearl Great Prize Central, a great article on this idea of the garden and the tree in the midst. I think I might have even linked this earlier. I'm having like deja vu. See if it'll load. All right. Nope, this is a different one, but it's a good one too here. Tree in the sacred center of the Garden of Eden. And it goes over for example, it'll tie in this stuff we talked about previously to keep overlaying these things and symbolically stack them for your remembering abilities. Because this is here the Kaaba. I forgot what to call it, but where they go around in circles around it. Remember this? Circumambulating, going around and around this the square, the cube. And what's inside there? You've got 3 pillars and a lot of other cool things and interesting concepts all tied into this that map onto the same idea of our temples and everything we're talking about in this ancient polar column. So this is again a normie take. They're not layering the cosmic aspect as I am. They're reaching into it, but still kind of clinging to the, I don't want to call it like straight Babylonian paradigm, but that's really what it is. It's like the worldly paradigm of how these things should be interpreted type of thing. But again, support for this whole idea of the temple being at the center of the garden and the 4 rivers going out, quartering it, like the squared circle, like the sun symbol that all mythologies and cultures and things recorded the sun as being. Doesn't quite look like that today, right? So it's just interesting that I'm noting this. I note it because it's not just interesting, it's compelling. I lied. All right, or in the midst, literally in the middle. That's what that means, in the midst, the tree in the midst, with the rivers, waters flowing, quartering around it. Okay. Consider all of this now with how we currently construct our temples in mind. Here are a few select examples among many more. And I want to click on these, and I can't unless I update this. So let me update this real quick. And I'll jump back into it. Let's go all the way down. Okay, here we are. So this should be familiar, but we have the Calgary, Alberta temple, I'm pretty sure, where you have the earth is the foot still down here, and it's 4 quarters. But you also have this heaven area in 4 quarters, where you have the center garden, tree of life, celestial room, love of God, presence of Jesus Christ, right? The hidden manna and white stone, all of that happens right here in the center, boom, of heaven. This is where you get the authority, and you take it back out when you walk out and go back to the earth, right? And above him is the boat in heaven and throne of the Father, right? Like, so you have the same concept, stacked polar configuration being played out even in our very construction. And I think I make mention of this later, but this I see here, this ark at the Welcome Center, I see it as the same ark of facsimile 2 of the throne of God, the same ark boat that the Egyptian gods are sitting in. And yeah, so again, one time would be interesting, but when you start to see it on most of the temples where they've got this polar center alignment with a cross in the center, a lot of it you can make out and see, and you have a squared earth at the bottom, right? It's just, okay, maybe 2 is interesting. Oh, but then you have it at other places, like this whole one is the Provo temple. Here you have the eye at the top. Once again, you've got the pillar and cross in the center here. It's kind of a squared circular building, but this one, like, expressly was to represent the pillar of fire and flame of the tabernacle, right? And here you have, once again, these bodies of water and kind of a squared circle or a flower thing here. Now, we don't quite have the exact earth at the bottom. Maybe I could zoom out and look for it. I think I did, but didn't find it. So it's not always perfect, but man, why do we have these same alignments again? Interesting. Okay, maybe it's just 3 like random chances. What's next here? What's this one? Oh, snaps. Here you have the eye up top again. You have the cross in the center, and you have another sphere down here that's squared, or at least has the 4 rivers running out, right? Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe that one's by chance as well. Oh, but here you have the tabernacle with 4, the camp of Israel basically coming out of it. Flip this upside down, and you've got the same thing with the earth down here being squared. Oh, this is the Rome temple, and you've got the vesica. Okay, I'm going to stop saying oh, that's annoying. But like, you have the cross here, it's a vesica. This is the birthing canal. And you have the waters and rivers and everything coming down. You have the 2 trees on the side. And in the visitor center here, you've got a Saturnian depiction as well, with all the 12 apostles that may be on earth, like below the Saturnian thing up in the air. If you've seen the pictures, you know what I'm talking about. But again, same thing can be mapped out here. I could have drawn a picture of Jesus on that temple. Oh man, who's this one? Oh, Gilbert Temple, square, big eye at the top. Down here at the bottom, another thing. You got this over here as well. Indianapolis, Indiana temple. Here you have a squared circle at the bottom at the footstool. You've got the squared temple in the center, and then you have the eye at the top. Denver, Colorado temple. Once more, we've got interesting shapes. This one's not as clear, but you still have the cut here, or the cross here in the center with the celestial room in the middle. And then the circle at the bottom that's usually squared with a fountain. You've got an eye that's water here, and then an even bigger vesica, or an oval shape, like the two-pointed vesica is what it's called, where it's overlapping circles. Like if I were to draw a circle here, you'd see it, and then a circle here. And this is the birthing canal. Paradise, the garden. Which other ones did I have? I think that was the last one. Okay, so there's just 9, but I mean, I could keep going and show you and say, wow, what a coincidence, right? What a coincidence. Like Christ is the living waters, and the figure in the midst, he's the tree, right? The crocodile serpent is symbolic of flowing, encircling waters of creation. And also in physical form, the plasma squatting man, or the cosmic thunderbolt. Let there be light, right? This correlates perfectly, too, with the earth previously encased by water at the poles, and how Peter spoke of it before the flood. The earth was both standing in and out of the water in the transfiguring Birkeland current river of paradise, or the Saturnian polar alignment. Here I snipped a picture of what we've watched in the previous episode, just to help visualize these like beads of plasma, the waters that encased these planets before the light stopped, and then they drifted and were captured. Eden was a cosmic state, a paradisical earth. The paradisical earth is a megazord, a temple and throne, or a family body of resonating planets sharing the same sustaining input current or light of Christ, or input current of light of Christ. Let me read that again. Eden was a cosmic state. It was the paradisical earth, and it is a megazord, a temple and throne, or a family body of resonating planets sharing the same sustaining input current of light of Christ. And I put the picture of the conference center rooftop here again, where you've got the same coordinate center. Even the crescent rotating around it with the 9 pyramids and the Jacob's ladder coming down. And I just noticed this too, that the rivers come down, they pour across here to this steeple, which would probably be the earth, and the footstool and the conference center being, this steeple saying, here we are on the earth kind of thing, from above down to below, the water's coming down. And then from here, they come down and go out. It's just pretty interesting. I still haven't been there. I need to go. If you haven't already, take some time to observe plasma in a ball, convection ball, or as the aurora today. Go look at videos of them, look them up on YouTube. I follow a lot of people on Twitter that are astrophotographers or cosmic weather photographers and stuff like that. And just the pictures they take are witness and evidence of these types of electric ideas being applied to weather and these things. So I love them. They, again, each little picture I see, it brings my mind back to these ideas, to the cosmic throne, to my covenants, to the temple, to Jesus, to all of these mythologies that are so excited and wrapped up in this. So like as many mechanisms as I can put in front of my eyes and brain to remember these things I do. And I associate or stack them symbolically by understanding them this way. So they can take the very appearance of water, these plasmas, in the auroras or in the ball, or as snakes, or as ropes, or as tassels, or as layers of fabric, sheets, or many other figures that appear in prophecy, and what we've been babbling on about. Here's a good list I like from Anthony Larson of a few motifs that plasma in an electric universe can manifest as. So what can plasma look like that they might have symbolized it as in their prophecies or writings, or in history, or in their petroglyphs, etc., etc. Motif 1, the hero's weapon. Plasma takes the form of a frightful sword, an arrow, an axe, a flail, or other weapon in the hands of a great warrior or divine messenger, a god whose identity merges with the lightning weapon itself. Surprisingly, the same weapon turns up as an instrument of healing or resurrection as well. So that's where you have the lightning and plasma taking that same life-taking and giving form. Either it burns, or who shall live in everlasting burnings kind of thing. Motif 2, a winged thunderbolt or a winged disc. Plasma appears as a radiant disc or sphere in the sky with heaven-spanning wings. It is a great thunderbird, or it is launched from the wings of such a bird, or burst forth as a flash of fire from its eye. It also can be seen as an axis mundi. Plasma streaks along the world axis, acquiring the form of a towering column that is said to have separated heaven and earth in primal times. This same pillar is the hero's staff, rod, or scepter, and through metamorphosis, it passes into other more complex forms as well. Again, going back to the shaping and changing of Moses' stick, his staff. Motif 4, a lightning wheel and flower. Plasma blossoms as radiating symmetrical streamers, the petals of a luminous flower, the awe-inspiring glory of a great star, or the spokes of a cosmic wheel turning in the heavens. Motif 5, a whirling thunderbolt. Plasma spirals into serpentine coils, crooked serpents, or winds upward in a helical motion, like DNA, think of DNA, around a central axial column. It whirls across the heavens as a celestial tornado, whirlwind, or whirlpool, sometimes graphically recorded as a whorl, swastika, or triskelion. Triskelion is like three-faced or three-armed or three-figured or three-sided thing. Motif 6, the caduceus. Plasma manifests as entwined serpents, ribbons, or filaments whirling upward along a central axis or column. Two entwined filaments signifying the lightning form taken by cosmic twins. Motif 7, thunderstones. Plasma arrives with falling stones or boulders. Typically, the falling rocks are flung by warring gods who are also brandish or are the divine thunderbolt. So those are just 7 motifs that Larson points out that plasma can take. And now here are some pictures of plasma just that we have. Here's aurora. Here you have it again, taking different colors, looking like a twisting helix here. That's what you can see. You can see it's twisting filaments like braids, or looking like towering sheets coming down. It can. Here you have it, looking like rivers. And if you watch them move, they move like snakes. They take forms like the clouds, and you can see like real figures in them sometimes. Here you have them looking like clouds, but also jutting down. Here you can see them columnating or pulling up along where the Birkeland current circles. More sheet river appearance. Here's more from satellites up top, looking at it jetting up along the Birkeland current, and it's jetting up along these lines that are between the pinches of the magnetic field around our Earth, the aura of the Earth that protects it, its magnetosphere, and this is the plasma that we're swimming through, essentially, that surrounds the solar environment, that makes its way in and lights up those aurora. Here's another good picture. Shows them light them up. You can see them, they form these little kink instabilities that would have, if you're looking up on a plasmic scale, made it look like the crown of the pharaoh that we were looking at earlier. So from the bottom of the polar column, or the footstool position where our Earth would be, looking up from the Earth, the planetary bodies stacked over the northern pole, certain planets would cause major plasma discharge morphologies that manifested and caused chaos in both heaven and Earth. Here's a picture of an off-polar axis view, looking at the side. Earth would be down here. You have Mars, Venus, and Saturn, and the discharges. These would make these different shapes. Now we look on axis, like shift yourself now down to the position of Earth. Looking up, you see the plasma coming down from Mars, connecting to Earth. It's the tongue of Medusa, right? And the discharge, which would have been like lightning crazy, of Venus's terrible aspect here, it would have been like the snakes of Medusa that petrify you, right? Think of that. Fossilization through electrification, plasma storms, ionic winds, soak all the water out of your body immediately, kind of thing. That's what this is. This is why the mythologies around looking it in the eye would turn you to stone, or in a mirror, like that kind of thing. So we've touched previously on how the planet Venus as an aspect or version of the sun in this Egyptian context, as Isis, Hathor, the Eye of Ra, crown or throne of the king. That's what you're going to see in Egyptian, Venus or Isis referred to. But through the various stages of her plasma morphology, as witnessed along the polar column, and later in her erratic course that crossed paths with Mars and Mercury, and with the Earth's orbit later during the Exodus and later encounters. This is what Worlds in Collision by Velikovsky starts with, the age in which Venus, as the sun, made Passover. And so that's why when you have the Egyptians calling the sun is before you, or evil is before you, Ra is before you, when they were warning Moses going out into the Red Sea or out into the wilderness with his people, this is what they were talking about, that Venus was in a position that was sketchy. Her train in coma and plasma streamers would spiral to form the whirlwind and the encircling Ouroboros, or the dragon, the crooked serpent. We already went over this, but I'm bringing it up in context of Job and the crocodile in the river, and all of this being very on point for our Saturnian genesis and interpretation. I'm sure other planets and bodies have taken the same form, just not Venus. But as an example, take a look at how comets are depicted in the book, or the comet book, Kometenbuch, from 1587 that I found online. And you have comets being depicted in all these same morphologies that we're just talking about. Here's a whirlwind, a spinning wheel, a flower, a plant. Here's a sword, literally depicted as a sword, and red skies, red seas, red dangers. Here you have feathered serpent almost, right? You have the feathered aspect of it in its lightning coma, and it's fuzzy almost. There's another one, like a wheel coming through, a chariot. If there were other bodies, you might think it was being pulled by horses or something if they were leading it. Here's where it's just like raining rocks and barad, bomb down, boom, 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 coming down from something up in the sky like that. Look at that. But this would be like a comma, the comet causing plasma phenomena as it crosses paths with the Earth. It doesn't have to like hit the earth either. Its tail can cause these kinds of things as you watch it go by, and the tail, the gases, the ionized plasma matter, and everything that's involved in that body start to mix and mesh and have reaction with our atmosphere. That's when you have plagues and all kinds of stuff happen. Here you have the caduceus, literally represented in a comet, where you have the rod and the serpent, basically, and the encircling serpent. Another one, it looks almost like a dandelion or whatever. What is it called? Blow for luck. Make a wish. Here's one. Looks like almost those drawings everybody makes of Ezekiel's vision. The rings within rings and circles and the Merkaba, blah, blah, blah. It's a comet. Okay. Why go on about this again? Because the facsimile in the Book of Abraham place many of the same elements of the Saturnian Megazord, the celestial throne, or our creative configuration of heaven and earth, in their correct context. And Joseph Smith's explanations for them are prophetic, supportive, and revelatory. Let's layer in some David Talbot's research. He writes about this figure, or the symbol of the circular serpent, in context of the Saturn myth from his book of that title. As a final example of overlapping imagery, I shall cite the case of the circular serpent. All the Saturnian gods, Atum Re, An, Yami, Huang Ti, Quetzalcoatl, Kronos, he's just, again, like Nibley, a whole bunch of different ones that are saying the same thing. So this is like death by 1,000 cuts and supporting evidence from disparate places. Reside within the fold of the serpent, the dragon, the fish, or the crocodile, etc. So all of this encircling plasma form can be depicted, or this pillar, as a dragon, a serpent, a fish, that kind of stuff. But this symbol cannot be evaluated in isolation from the celestial earths, eggs, wheels, temples, crowns, and eyes which fill the ancient lexicon. In general, mystic tradition, the dragon, the serpent, or the fish biting its tail is a representative of time. Father Time, of course, is Saturn. Thus, the Greeks placed in the hands of Kronos a snake which formed a ring by holding its tail in its mouth. This circular serpent is clearly that which the Hindus called Kali, or time. The Zoroastrians, which would have been Nimrodians, right, the Babylonians going back, represented Zervan, time, by an enclosing serpent. A serpent encircles a Nahuatl calendar. This is going back to Maya. Wheel of Time, published by Clavigero. On the famous Mexican calendar, stone twin serpents form a single enclosure around the stone. The Egyptian associated the circular serpent with Atum, or the god of time, identifying the serpent with the cosmic waters erupting from the Creator. I am the outflow of the primeval flood, who emerged from the waters, the serpent announces. This is probably from the coffin text or the Book of the Dead. The water serpent issuing from Atum constituted an aspect of the Creator, eventually forming a coil around himself. I bent right around, here's quoting it again. I was encircled in my coils, one who made a place for himself in the midst of his coils. His utterance was what came forth from his mouth. Why the references to the utterance of the god in association with the appearance of the serpent coil? The reason is that the serpent, embodying the outflow of erupting waters, was himself a manifestation of the Creator's speech. He's describing the movement of Venus moving around, and this, like we've been watching in that video with the column coming down, the speech of the Lord, the light coming through and connecting. It wasn't the first creation that they're describing, but creation as they understood it, happening by the same pattern after the flood kind of thing. Planets moving the same electromagnetic ways, connecting with each other. Mini let there be lights kind of thing. If that makes sense. And if it does, praise the Lord. In the coffin text, the great God or master of all cosmos recalls the original age while I was still in the midst of the serpent's coil. And the king hopes to attain this very enclosure. The king lies down in your coil. The king sits in your circle, proclaims the pyramid text or a pyramid text. So again, you have this idea of the circling serpent being part of the enclosure or throne of God, and the Pharaoh wanting to sit into it, and it is giving like the power of creation, and waters are erupting from it. Like all of this fits our Saturnian interpretation of this. So can this serpent be anything other than the band of that enclosed the sun? So this is how they drew it, as a circle with a dot in the middle. And that's what they're talking about, this serpent enclosing it. And that would have been Venus around it and Mars in the middle. The sun god Re, while deemed and Ket, dweller in the fiery circle. And this is also how our Saturn stones are pretty much as well on the temple. So just, again, throwing it back. It says right here, the sun god Re, while deemed Anket, is that what it says? Amiket. Amiket, dweller of the fiery circle, is also Amihemph, dweller in his fiery serpent. Do not the circle and the serpent mean the same thing? The hieroglyphs offer conclusive evidence. Though the common pictograph of Ra is a circle with a dot in it, the Egyptians also denoted Ra by the glyph of a circle with a dot in it, but also with like a snail or serpent kind of coming out of it, showing the serpent as the band around the primeval sun. This direct identification of the serpent in the circle of the Aten enables us to test the coherence of Aten symbolism as a whole. For if the serpent denoted the band of the enclosed sun, originally, this one that goes around it with just a dot in it, one should find two things. That the serpent was the circle of the mother goddess and defined the limits of the all, i.e. the cord, the egg, the belt, the shield, Saturn's cosmos. And two, that the serpent enclosed the whole, or the world wheel, city, throne, navel, and the celestial ocean. That the same serpent formed the wall of the cosmic temple. It encircled the god king as a crown, enclosed the celestial waters as a vase, and defined the circle of the all-seeing eye. And you have Egyptian and Mayan versions of the same circular serpent as water containers, so holding waters. Once again, these themes all coming together. Throughout all of the ancient Egypt, and the circular serpent was the symbol of the Great Mother. In the hieroglyphs, the uraeus serpent, often used in conjunction with an egg, means goddess. The goddess Uchet cometh unto thee and form the living uraeus to anoint thy head, reads the Book of the Dead. A Karnak temple inscription states that the goddess Mut, in the form of a serpent, encircled her father Ra and gave birth to him as Khonsu. So again, a recreation effect in the plasma interactions between some planets up in the sky, and they're showing it as they're saying it as the planets are mating and creating kind of thing. Okay. What time is it? In the same way, the Babylonians knew the great goddess as the mother Python of heaven. The cosmos, according to Jeremiah, was represented as the womb of the shining Tiamat, the enclosing serpent or dragon of the primeval sea of chaos, right? So also did the Hindus, Cretans, Celts, Greeks, Romans, and Mexicans represent the mother goddess as a serpent or dragon. It is the same thing to say that the circular serpent enclosed Saturn's cosmos. In the Egyptian language, the coil formed by the serpent is literally, or the coil formed by the serpent is literally the cord or the band indicated in the by the hieroglyphs, the Aten. It's like a line and then a circle around it, and this swoosh thing. The serpent itself was the rope which the Creator stretched round about, gathering the primeval waters or primeval matter into organized enclosure. Saturn's primordial home was a simple enclosure, a dwelling universally recorded by the sign with a circle and a dot in it. Myth-making imagination expressed the enclosure in many ways, and it is the very variety of formulations which testifies to the band's overwhelming impact on the ancient world. To deal meaningfully with this imagery, one must admit the influence of a celestial order vastly different from that familiar to us today. We customarily think of the myth as the opposite of reality. Yet the consistency of the testimony suggests that the mythical view, passed down onto us through sacred signs, monuments, and literature, connects us with a very real world confronted by the first myth makers. The present heavens explain neither the ancient rites of kingship, nor the array of astral symbols which grew up around the king, who was conceived as the human incarnation of the ruling divinity in heaven. Always, the ritual and symbol referred to an age different from our own, an age when Saturn, the central sun, ruled from the celestial pole, encircled by his band of glory. Saturn's band was the primeval cosmos, viewed as the planet god's own consort, the womb on the cosmic waters. The myths, and again, going back to the pictures of the temple, that's why there's always this vesica, and I keep saying the womb, the womb. It's the enclosure of all this. It's what it's the center that binds it all together, kind of thing. The plasma that brings it all together. The myths of the light. The myths alternatively depict the band as a revolving island in the sky, a cord of rope forming the boundary of Saturn's domain, a shining egg. Think of also the tassel and 3 rings on the right shoulder, right? And the tassel attaching from the mortarboard or the square of the top at the head down to the tassel. Now that's removed, right? And that's also symbolic in itself. And I've written about that in other places. If you're interested, reach out, look for it. Okay, but here it's going to go into that a bit. It says, Saturn's band was the primeval cosmos, viewed as the planet god's own consort, the womb on the cosmic waters. The myths alternately depict the band as a revolving island in the sky, a cord of rope forming the boundary of Saturn's domain, a shining egg, a shield, and the creator's collar, belt, or girdle. This was the earth, which the universal creation legend, the great god raised from the celestial sea. In mythical history, it became the ancestral land of peace and plenty, Adam's paradise. Saturn's kingdom possessed the form of a great wheel. It was the creator's revolving throne, the celestial city, the lost navel or middle place, where cosmic, mythical history took its start. Around the border of the heavenly land flowed a circular river or ocean. This is all what we're talking about, bringing it all together here. The same band was Saturn's revolving temple, which he wore as a crown, in which he dwelt in the pupil of the all-seeing eye, as the cosmic vase. The band housed Saturn's waters of life. And finally, Saturn's band appears as the guise of the shining serpent wrapped around the central sun and denoted by the Egyptian sign, again with the circle and the thing. He's just repeating itself, kind of summarizing again. So divorced from the archetypal enclosure and in various symbols, which temples, crowns, thrones, wheels, etc. all use, they appear as isolated forms of uncertain origin. We simply take them as facts. Why then were these forms systematically related in language, art, ritual, and myth? They're all put in the same places, same order for the same reasons. That's what we're talking. That's what he's talking about. It is not a question of later generations recklessly joining unrelated images. The further back we go, the greater the unity. That's what's freaking out a lot of people when they go and look at this stuff, is that they used to just push it off as like, hey, they're just trying to make sense of it. They put it all together. It can't really be consistent. No, the further back you go, the more consistently they put all these things in this same Saturnian context. That's what the Hamlet's Mill also started to find out when you get through that book. Here we find the central sun wearing the cosmic city, the temple, as a crown, making it his throne, the eye of heaven, the holy land, or the vase of upper waters, shining in the center of an egg called the earth. The circular, or the and encircled by a river which forms the wall of the temple, but also the circle of the gods. In each case, we find that the symbol refers directly to the womb of the mother goddess enclosing the great father Saturn. In reviewing this imagery of the enclosure, one confronts many dominant motifs of ancient religion. Whatever the mythical formulation of the band, the hymns celebrate its presence at the polar center. Yet who can locate a source of the imagery in today's tranquil heavens? Where is this revolving river of splendor and terror? Where is this city of the white wall, the clear and radiant holy land, the temple, like a dragon gleaming, the throne of light, the golden egg, or the fiery serpent? If the text present alternative visions of the band, they never question its existence in primeval times. It is the archaic reality concealed within a massive body of myths and symbols, all pointing to the signs with a circle and a dot in it, and a squared circle with a dot, or a squared circle, as images of Saturn, the polar sun. Whew. All right, I know that was a lot, but let's refocus and synthesize this to what we've already been discussing in previous essays. This next section reinforces the Megazord analogy. And again, that's important because the individual elements of facsimile 1 are collectively, appropriately presented and explained by Joseph Smith according to a Saturnian cosmology. They're recorded by Abraham in the right place, and they're obviously, should have been and were presented in Abraham's day in that form to imitate this ancient Saturnian physical configuration. So, jumping back into it, he says, as creative intelligence and voice, word of heaven, think about Jesus being the light, right, and the word. So as the creative intelligence and voice, or the word of heaven, the great Father came to be viewed as the thinking and speaking man, a towering giant whose body was the original cosmos. This is the heaven man, the Atlas man, the Atman. Both Atum and the later Adam possess this distinctive character as heaven man, but certain developments of the idea stand out. And when we say heaven man, we're talking about a congregation of planets, not a literal person, but it's personified in mythology and confused in false religious and diffused rites. So, 1, he says, in the Egyptian version of the myth, the great god Atum-Re, through tumultuous speech, brings forth a circle of subordinate gods as satellites revolving in his company and forming his own limbs. This is the Megazord. The central god, as the revolving members compose the primordial cosmos, or the heaven or world. The crucial term is Paut, or primeval matter, referring to the material emitted by Atum, which took form as the cosmos. Paut is equivalent to the Ku, or fiery words of power, uttered by the great god. Think of this too as Michael in creation, and Adam being the first man, and how Michael was so pivotal and the messenger of Christ in creation, essentially, like that. There's more power to Adam and Michael and the creation and this original configuration of paradise when seen all together like that. Okay. The term signifies at once the circle of the gods and the body of Atum-Re, which is to say cosmos, or the company of the gods, the creator's limbs and body. That the created cosmos emanated from the primordial God is a theme which persisted in later traditions of Adam. From Adam Kadmon sprang successive degrees of creation. Gnostic tradition knew Adam as the prima materia of the cosmos, a remarkable parallel to the Egyptian primeval matter, the limbs of Atum-Re. The great god the great God's body embraces and is heaven, not only in Egyptian, but in all principal cosmologies. Like Atum, the Sumerian An, or Anu, encompasses the entire heaven. Indeed, his very name signifies heaven, and one can trace the equation of God and heaven, or shining heaven, through all of the ancient languages. The Chinese Tian signifies both the high God and heaven, as does the Altaic Tengri. The Sanskrit Deus, Latin Deus, carries the double meaning God and heaven. It is useless to look to the open sky for an explanation of this equivalence. Originally, heaven meant the organized cosmos or body of the God One, formed by the circle of lesser gods. The myths unanimously insist that this celestial order collapsed with the death of the great God, the heaven man, and that would be the flood event. Okay, so again, driving this point home, a collection of bodies, a collection of members, a collection of gods in the heavens were the original heaven man, the original paradise, the original creation, the original home of the gods. The all-embracing, and this idea of it being encased in water, the waters of creation, this is the golden fleece. So when you're talking about Jason and the Argonauts, which we'll get to later, this is that search for a golden era, a golden garment, the garment of Adam, basically, like the original garment of Adam, which had him in a celestial state, or before it, or which he was given out of the celestial state, I guess. Or respective of, what wasn't needed before it. Okay, where did I leave off? How can we speak of a solitary God when Egyptian texts refer to an endless number of primary deities? In more than one locality, the priests themselves. The all-embracing character of the Father God. Oh, I didn't read this part, so let me read it. The all-embracing character of the Great Father facilitated an important development of the God's image at a time when cultural mixture could have destroyed the monotheistic theme. In ancient Egypt, almost every district seemed to have had its favored representative of the God One, a fact which gives the great compendiums of Egyptian religion, the pyramid texts, etc., a misleading appearance of confusion. How can we speak of a solitary God when Egyptian texts refer to an endless number of primary deities? Well, in more than one locality, the priests themselves at least partially resolved the problem by adopting alien gods as the limbs of the local great god, a process obviously encouraged by the pre-existing image of the god as heaven man. This habit was widespread in Egypt and occurred as early as the pyramid texts, which assimilate a number of once independent gods into the body of Atum. So it's basically like you don't see them in heaven anymore. You don't see the gods that once you were representing with things on the earth. And so they started to attribute false gods or other things to the original memory of it. And that's where you get confusion. Here's an example of how Horus takes the place of Osiris in later texts, who forget kind of the memory of Osiris. Hold up. Okay. Here's the text in comparison. So one says, "Your head is Horus of the netherworld, O imperishable. Your nose is the jackal. Your teeth are Sopad, O imperishable. Your hands are Happy and Duametef." I don't know the names of these people. These are Egyptian gods. But these four and Horus, they correspond with the four gods, Elkanah, Libnah, Mamakra, and Korash, and the god of Pharaoh. So all these ones are the same gods that we're seeing Abraham being sacrificed to. So keep that in mind. I'm not just reading these to bore you to death. This is important. Your head is Horus, he says here. A hymn from the papyrus of Ani similarly honors Osiris. So here you have the same gods being swapped out, basically, or gods being swapped out, but the same archetype. It says the hair of Osiris, Ani, is the hair of Nu. The face of Osiris, Ani, is the face of Ra. The face of Osiris, Ani. What they're saying is there's a one collective Megazord god, and all his different body parts are these other gods, these other lesser deities, right? This is the idea, kind of the Roman pantheon too, but instead of one god, they called their enclosure by its location. In almost the same words, the papyrus of Nu joins the divinities Osiris, Ptah, Anpu, Hathor, Horus, Isis, and others to the body of Ra. Think of this also now in the contraction of the word Israel, right? We know there are lots of meanings, prophetic meanings, even recent prophetic meanings in terms of what it means, but it's a contraction of Isis, Ra, and El, which would have been these same planetary gods, a unified body of multiple members, which is emblematic in the tribes of Israel. And think of how they're stationed, that they're multiple tribes, they're the lesser gods of the bigger body, right? Like it's the same concept as above, so below, and it maps onto it really well. I don't know how to express it yet in a way that's easy to understand, I think. Now he says here, in Memphite theology, later Egyptian stuff, theology, Atum, Horus, Thoth, and the company of gods become the limbs of Ptah. Synchronization of this sort, though appearing absurd to us today, actually helped to preserve the original idea against the eroding forces of cultural assimilation. Faced with the growing number of competing deities, the priests proclaimed, there was only one great god in the beginning, whose body encompassed a circle of subordinate deities. So there's the Megazord support and help from Talbot in the Saturn myth in collecting these ideas. So there's no way not to tie Adam to this primordial heaven man and king. In this, I find great excitement in gospel harmony. It even makes certain statements by Brigham Young that are stumbling blocks for some, nodes of confirmation and reverence once you get to this point. So moving up facsimile 2. The 5 gods mentioned here, Elkanah, Libnah, Mamakra, Gorash, I like to say them, obviously, Pharaoh, remind me of the 5 mentioned in Nimrod encounter, where he says, worship the fire, worship the water, no, worship the clouds, I'll worship the wind, no, worship me, right? It's the same pattern, the same 5 archetype here. In the very last, at the very least, it's 4 variants in a central ruler or king or cosmocrator, who would have been the crocodile down below, right? So you have the 4 elements, the 4 directions, the 4 all kinds of stuff. This is the tetramorph. You're going to see it in the throne of God imagery as we go forward here. These 4 figures are the same 4 sons of Horus. 4 plus Horus equals 5, just like we said. Before Horus, it was Osiris, as we read in the Talbot excerpt. So these, I just want to read from the Wikipedia excerpt of this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But these are the names that were in the song above that I read from the book of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I think is what it was from. But Imseti, Hapi, Duamatep, and... All right, so it says here, the 4 sons were also linked with stars in the sky, with the regions of Egypt, and with the cardinal directions. Okay? North, east, south, west. Oh, my, okie dokie. All right, you're good, Joseph Smith. You all right? You all right, Joseph? In our paradigm, with either Osiris or Horus as the ancient northern heaven man, it doesn't matter, his enclosure of heaven is supported by the 4 winds or rivers or legs of his throne, the 4 cardinal points or directions of the compass. Joseph Smith correctly identified these figures as the 4 quarters of the earth in their upside down position in the hypocephalus of facsimile 2. Here they are again, right? Upside down in the earth position, the footstool position. And he says correctly, this represents the earth in its 4 quarters. This represents this here down below are pictures of things. Consider the Calgary temple aerial we've already explored in this context, where the earth is the upside down footstool of the heavenly cross, the center of the temple, and the seat of mercy, judgment seat, the throne. This is the throne. I even consider, I already said that. This is the welcome arches are the boat of God, the top right of the facsimile 2. I don't have it there. Oh, it's here, right here, this one. Compare it to facsimile 2 hypocephalus now. Also, take note of how in other hypocephali that have been recovered from Egypt, there's a 4-headed figure who appears on what we call kolob. What does that mean? How does that happen? Oh, Joseph Smith was wrong. No, you're an idiot. You don't look things through and you don't have the correct perspective, right? Let me help you. But no, you won't listen to me. You won't even get through episode 3 without having to make up some excuse why you won't listen to me and you can discredit me. But listen to this. Here you have in the center, this is what is called by Joseph Smith as kolob. And what I've described as the flood event, basically. You have Saturn leaving, fleeing. You have a discharge. You have these rivers of water. Everything is the correct thing. This is the flood, and this is the takeover of Oliblish afterwards, right? So you have this is the golden age to the silver age depicted. And here in these other hypocephali, you have the same tetramorph figure in the middle with the rivers coming down, signifying the flood and a plasma event, right? This is Osiris in the center. That one's really small. You can't really see, but the 4 heads, once again, you have 3 up top here, 3 planets primary in this kolob configuration. And again, I'm very lenient in saying kolob as Saturn a lot and stuff, or Saturn stones and kolob as they represent Saturn. But when we talk about Saturn in this pole position, as we just read, you got to think of the Megazord, that it's all together or one. It's the body of Christ, like his whole church is the body, right? We talk about Christ, and yes, he's the head. Just like Saturn would have been the head, or the top, or the back, or the supreme deity of this enclosure, this body, this congregation. So again, these map on perfect. The 4 heads are actually a confirmation of this stuff and not some knock against Joseph Smith. You got it right. And like I said, the 2 faces of Jupiter have a lot to do with stuff that continues to support this line of thought and this perspective looking back at these things. All right, enough of those. These figures are more commonly or modernly thrown around as canopic jars, and are associated with mummification. They would put the different viscera, different parts or the sensitive organs and things that would rot quickly in different jars, right? But again, think of how this maps onto the whole idea of these things being the different body parts of the one God, the collective God. Same idea. The supporting pillars. So this was a huge criticism initially. I think we've talked about this. Hugh Nibley's works regarding Abraham, and these refute these things with witty voltage. If you've not already making collecting Nibley's works and studying them a priority in your personal studies, or I'm just saying make that a priority. I have been better able to understand and follow his writings and musings with joy because of this cosmic electric catastrophic synthesis. Okay, that's why I'm so excited to read him. I was realizing as I was reading out some of his essays, I was like, man, some people are going to turn this off and never listen to me again. But I promise there's value there. So these are the canopic jars. Now, they say here in this definition too, the term canopic refers to the mistaken association by early Egyptologists with the Greek legend of Canopus, the boat captain of Menelaus on the voyage to Troy of Sparta. Now, I don't think it's a mistake. I think they're mistaken because they're not using a syncretism like we do. So while the Wikipedia scribes consider that Canopus connection is a mistake, it doesn't need to be in a Saturnian cosmology. It fits. Why? Well, because Canopus was the captain of the mythological Argo Navis. That fits with the Saturnian wheel motif, okay? It was a boat that went around cosmos and went on voyages, and all the epic versions fighting a seven-headed dragon and the Sentinel Man, and between the two pillars in the mountains, like all the archetypes are present, and they're shown in the story of Jason and the Argonauts, where this boat, the Argo Navis, is their ship, right? And what's the quest? It's the quest for the Golden Age, the Golden Fleece. Here we go. The four streams, or legs of the throne, turned the wheel, and the crescent ship arc about the heavenly waters. Mythological quests are most often interpreted as a memory or allegory of the events of the dissolution of the ancient heaven and earth. They are usually a quest to restore the lost golden age of paradise. The story of Jason and the Argonauts, where Canopus is the captain of the ark, is no exception. I encourage you to reread the myth, and all myths basically, from this perspective once you've started to grasp the main concepts as we've been discussing them. The four sons of the horizon are the four cardinal directions and the four legs of the wheel throne of God, the four vital organs within his body, hence the canopic jars of the viscera, the four faces or aspects of the sun, and the four spokes or helm of the once heavenly ark. Here's another animation of this ark moving around the heavenly center.
Lastly, we must acknowledge one of the most pervasive symbols of world mythology. All mythic traditions agree that the land of the gods rested on the golden or fiery mountain of heaven.
It's a totem pole. The Thunderbird sits at the top, right? All these mythologies point back to this. Like, nobody's going to convince me otherwise that, oh, you're looking past the mark, Leland. Get out of town. Get out of town.
It is evident that the core symbols of human yearning, suffering, and devotion across the millennia trace to the very events from which the first civilizations themselves arose. Now the question must be asked: if the great mythic archetypes are explained by events unknown to our world, what can the electric universe and the leading edge of plasma science tell us about the ancient experience?
And here's the ark moving as a boat here in a position, and this would be the same tetramorph, the south, east, northwest, that kind of idea. This four pillars or four positions or four morphs, four positions, aspects of the sun god that support him in his position. Okay. Plutarch, he was a Greek historian, biographer, and essayist who lived during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Check out this passage from his well-known Moralia. Moreover, they give to Osiris the title of general and the title of pilot to Canopus, from whom they say that the star derives its name. Also that the vessel which the Greeks called Argo, in the form of a ship of Osiris, has been set among the constellations in his honor, and its course lies not far from that of Orion and the dog star, and these the Egyptians believed that one is sacred to Horus and the other to Isis. So here we have it tying back straight to that ship and Canopus and to the myth of Osiris, to the same celestial heavenly setup. Now, he's obviously talking about the constellations because there is a literal constellation Argo. I think I had it up here. Oh, yeah, right here. here's the constellation Argo Navis. It's in the southern sky, and the keel of the boat, the center portion. Never mind, I won't go into that. Okay. This concept of the four quarters or the faces of heaven and of the earth is foundational. Okay. It stacks onto what is called the tetramorph. Once you begin to understand these things I'm weaving together in a Saturnian framework, it will enhance your ability to understand prophecy. Why? Because the tetramorph, read this, I guess, is featured prominently in throne doctrine and prophecy, in both the alpha and the omega aspects of it. Hold up. 5 minutes, and I got to take a break for a sec. So, okay, hold up. It's featured prominently in throne doctrine and prophecy, in both the alpha and the omega aspects of it, meaning new creation and apocalypse. So, at the beginning and the end of this alpha omega form, tetramorph plays a role in it. So, let's read this real quick. A tetramorph is a symbolic arrangement of four differing elements, or the combination of four disparate elements in one unit. The term is derived from the Greek tetra, meaning four, and morph, shape. So, we're going to get into this. Actually, how much more do I have here? I've got quite a bit, and I need to pause, and this is already at 3.5 hours. So we're going to stop. We're going to pick up the tetramorph. We're going to watch this whole video. It's 40 minutes long. So we'll make this a whole new episode where we go over the tetramorph, seraphim, cherubim, and how they fit into it as planetary aspects or guardians of the throne, and how it's depicted in symbolic imagery. And then we'll wrap it back up into the tabernacle, the temple, how the altar of sacrifice takes after these same forms, how the Book of Mormon witnesses to it, how our modern temples are, again, presenting this all in proper context, and then we'll continue to move on through the facsimile and wrap up with Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah, there's still a whole lot. Holy moly. So we're going kind of slow. So this will be a 3-part series, but that'll be all right. At least you got a taste of it. Thank you for sticking with me for now. We'll go ahead and phase out and start right back up. Where are we going to start up? Right here with the tetramorph. We'll start back in. All right, guys. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll try to do this either tomorrow or sometime before conference this week. If I don't get it out before conference, no, I probably will. I think I will. And if not, it'll be during conference weekend because I've got the whole weekend off. I plan on soaking up the Spirit and receiving lots of personal revelation. My challenge to you, if you've been inspired to study or look into anything else as you've been listening, please do it. Please re-listen. Please write me questions. Let me know what you're thinking. I'd love to help. But more than anything, follow the promptings that you might feel as you study these things. And write something down that you'd like to know or have the Lord speak to you about during conference. Write it down now before you listen, and then listen with that intent that the Lord's going to speak to you. And it's not what the speakers are saying, but what is the Spirit speaking to you. Love you guys. Take it easy, and we'll talk soon.